Welcome to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce. The Falmouth Chamber is dedicated to working on behalf of our members to make Falmouth a better place to live, work, and conduct business. We are committed to developing the economic, cultural, educational, and civic interests of our community and welcome the support from all organizations to achieve our combined goals. Whether you call Falmouth home, are a summer resident, or a visitor, we hope you take advantage of all that the Chamber has to offer.
Hi, I'm Bob from Crane Appliance. Since 1983, as a family-owned company, our goal has been simple: to give our neighbors of the Cape and Islands a great shopping experience. Rest easy knowing our professional team will listen to your needs and help you pick out the perfect appliances. We'll take care of everything throughout the sale, delivery, and installation process. And we even have our own in-house service department. Crane Appliance, we call the Cape and Islands home.
Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.
Hosting services for fctv.org are provided by MegaNet Communications. MegaNet offers a wide array of internet services including Mega Backup Cloud Service, server colocation, T1, fiber, Metro Ethernet, as well as telephone services such as hosted PBX and digital voice. Their number one goal is to keep your communications network up and running and allow you to focus on growing your business. 877-634-2638 or MegaNet.
All join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to recuse myself for the first item.
Yes, ma'am. So the first thing is summary of actions is administrative orders, a vote to exempt Nancy Taylor, a member of the Select Board, from certain provisions of the Conflict of Interest Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 268A, Section 20B. Has everyone had a chance to review the submittal?
Well, the question I had, it referred to sort of a statement of what the nature of the contract was, and I couldn't find one in my packet. So can you tell me just, what the contract?
You know, she told me it was, it's a consulting, some kind of special educational, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact details.
I think, so it's going to come way of a grant, and I do believe it's for some sort of supplemental services, learning services that she would be directing and working at. And it's short-term, and is funded by the grant.
Well, I could tell,
That much I know, I don't know.
I could see that it was short-term. So it really has to do with a particular educational program?
I believe it's
Yes.
educational rather than administrative.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Well, with that, I would move approval.
I'll second.
And all those in favor, but do we have, no, we don't need a roll call
No.
today.
Aye. Aye. Great, thank you.
Good. Especially, I think that was easy to come to that conclusion. We don't have any purview over schools or their activities,
No.
although we do fund their work.
Certainly not educational program.
Nancy, Sam had asked about the nature of it, and we commented that it was educational rather than administrative. Would that be
Yes.
correct? Okay.
What it is it's an educational advocate to work with dropout prevention.
Oh, okay.
So that I would be working directly with kids and families, not necessarily as the administrator.
Administrative, thank you.
And it's from January to June. It's a DESI grant, it's short-term.
Okay, great, thanks.
I'll give that to you to.
Next, we have discussion of Charter Review Committee recommendations. Nancy, you brought this up. Would you like to start off the conversation?
So I would be happy to. So I thought that the Charter Review did some really nice work and in terms of making some recommendations as to how we work on our agenda and how we function as a board. And I thought it was really helpful. And so what I did was, in preparation for this meeting, was I just made some of my own notes on what they had written and what the article that Dr. Clark had put in the newspaper. And I also went and looked at other agendas across the Cape to see how did they structure their meetings. Many of them were similar to ours, but others had some really good ideas. So one of the biggest pieces that I thought about and that I looked at was, it's actually twofold. One is the town manager's report, and can we use the town manager's report to help guide some of our conversations? The second part of that is that the staff, and this comes right out of their recommendations, could we have the staff prepare the analysis, precedent, and legal constraints when considering a recommendation from the town manager? For example, when you have a discussion by the board, I think we need to go from this huge discussion down to sort of like a funnel, because we don't do all of the prep work for that discussion. But I'd like to see the town manager's office come out and have the recommendation. First, give us, what are the options? How would you manage this? So here are the three options. They lay out sort of the homework that they did to sort of back up the options, and then come out with a recommendation and say, here's why I recommend this. Because I think just putting something on for a discussion of the board, we don't have the guiding questions that we need to answer to make a really good decision. So that was a piece I thought about quite a lot, and putting that report from the town manager earlier in the meeting so that we could then discuss what the issues on the agenda and what the recommendations are. And documented in that report would be sort of all of that homework about the different agenda items. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to do is streamline so that we can spend more time talking about policy and our 5 top priorities.
I think that you're onto a good track there. I know when Mr. Suso makes his report in the packet, it is sort of an introduction to the meeting. It's what it's going to be about. This week, we're going to talk about this and that, and it's a good reminder for us of, what to focus on. And to incorporate that at the beginning of the meeting might be wise, because it kind of outlines where we're headed during that meeting. And when you say that they could give us like a few options, are you thinking in terms of the whole, for every item? Or was that like for a doc hearing?
Well, and I don't think it has to be for every item, but it has to be for items that we're going to have a discussion about. Why are we having this discussion? What are the major points of that discussion? And what are the board's 3 or 4 top options? And why are those 4 options important? and then what the town manager would recommend, that we go with option B. And here's why I'm telling you that it's my recommendation that we go with B, for this reason, and this reason. And that, I just think we need to guide the conversation and guide the process a little bit tighter.
No, I'm not opposed to it. What do you think of that, Mr. Suso?
I'm comfortable with that process if you want to give it a go.
It'd probably get us a little bit more focused.
We just need to determine which ones you want to focus on in terms of recommendations, which we can do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, naturally, we always know when we look at the agenda, what the big discussions are gonna be, right? So I think it would be helpful. I think there's two pieces. There's a sort of process, structure piece, which is how do we run the meeting, what order are things in, and we can talk about that after. I don't know why, some of those really simple things that nobody is gonna be here for. I understand we just kind of put them in the front in order to get done with them, but even if it takes 10 or 15 minutes, that's 10 or 15 minutes that the other important stuff that people are here for, like all those administrative orders to me should be at the end, because they rarely ever include a presentation or a member of the public. If they are, then we can plan that accordingly. But, so I think there's a process piece about how we structure the agenda. Same thing as what I was saying about, I don't know that we, unless somebody from town has flagged a concern about a licensing issue, I don't know why we have to ask those folks to be here. If we have a concern, we can, hold it and have them come back to our next one. I mean, obviously they're not prevented from coming, but, sometimes people are sitting here for a really long time for, licensing where we don't even ask them any questions. Because there's so much detail that goes into the form, and all of our departments check it out before and give us their, police check it out, zoning, fire. So we already have all that weigh in. So I think that those things we can look at and try to streamline and put the stuff that is going to require a lot of debate, public input, way at the front. And then I agree with Nancy that, if we're going to have 2 or 3 really meaty issues where we're actually going to vote and make a decision, set some policy, I do think it's helpful to make the conversation productive. And rather than it being at entry level, it should already be at, the 3rd tier. It shouldn't be at we should have already had in our packet all the entry level stuff. It's incumbent upon us when we get it to ask some questions. And I know sometimes the window isn't big, but if what Nancy is talking about is done, we'll have some of that. We'll have some of the weigh-in from Julian as to why he's suggesting, this particular option, the legal component of it or whatever. So certainly it's not going to be for every issue. It's probably a couple of issues on an agenda in a given week. Maybe it's not even that many, because sometimes we're just, we're not voting. We're just having an initial discussion, and whatever Julian gives us, and staff gives us, it won't be as detailed. It might be a little bit of background information, but I think that's really helpful. It also, maybe it prevents, if we do it well, maybe it prevents staff from having to come and be here until 10:30 at night, because Peter McConerty will have already given us some information. I think we can do it in a way that's just more respectful of the time of staff as well as respectful of the time for the public.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said. I thought that actually makes a lot of sense. I would say that I think I'm going to take personal responsibility. I think we're remiss in carefully vetting the policies that are sent to us. We sort of trust our staff to reword these things and send them back. But I think there were significant wording issues with that fiscal policy that in reflection on it says, that's not the emphasis that we as the board should be giving the staff. And I think we want to be careful not to see this thing come back at us 2 months later and then quickly say, oh yeah, and just vote through it and say, yeah, that's what we said, because words do make a difference. And they make a difference in terms of the strategy that the staff uses in basically prosecuting the interests of the town. And so I just want to stress to us, we need to be placing more emphasis on getting the policy very clear so that it's clear to our staff as to what we expect from them.
And I found on an agenda from Harwich, they have what they call the consent agenda. And I'm wondering if we could do something like that. It goes back to, Megan, what you were saying, that these are things that we don't really need a lot of discussion on, and that we vote them as one, and we're done. And so I think there are a whole lot of different ways that we can sort of tighten up, and to Sam's point, spend more time talking about policy, which is really what we're charged to do. And I like the idea of the time, and some of my notes come right out of that article. I like the idea that I think we need to reinforce the time to keep things tighter. And I think we should really look into the assignment of the liquor licenses. And if we could get some information around creating an elected or appointed liquor commission. Just something to think about as we're walking through this. But I thought they did a lot of work, and I thought we should really consider their recommendations.
Well, what kind of action steps can we take today? Because we've talked about this a couple of times, and one thing I would like to do is get out of the beach wedding business.
Yes.
You know, that's such a minor, innocuous thing, and also, we don't actually provide parking. You know, we don't really do anything to facilitate their event. We say you park at your own risk, there's no reservations available, we're not doing anything to help them, other than giving them permission to stand on the beach. So,
I mean, to respond to your question, Mr. Chair, I think you could, let's see, is it on the agenda? I was going to say you can vote tonight to make that change, but maybe it's not addressed specifically enough on the agenda. So we would just put it on the agenda, and we can put it on the administrative agenda just as, you know, to vote to delegate to the town manager approval of, and we can, you know, you can let us know whether it's just weddings or if you want to do that for all of the special events.
eventually, I'd like to have the special events committee take the complete responsibility, because right now, there's a little break in the chain of command, because I think we're putting too much reliance on them, having already reviewed it, but at then the last second, we put our stamp on it and say, yeah, okay, it's a good idea, and then I go down to the marina and I see that we've got 2 events happening at the same time, and there's no place to park for the boaters, and, you know.
But I guess, to that point, I guess if we have a good, strong committee, they keep a calendar like we don't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that things come before us and we don't know we know what we've approved, but nobody's keeping a tally. They have that. If it's clear to the public that grievances and concerns about events go to them, then I am personally comfortable giving that. If it becomes problematic, we obviously hear about it, and then we could address it. But I think special events take up a big chunk of time for us. And again, I agree that it's a little bit of a messy, it's weird right now, right? Because they vet these things, they say to us there's no issues, we put our stamp on at the last minute, but we don't, we're not really keeping track of what's going on a given weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it would be very helpful if, that's their dedicated task. And if we're able to do that, if things become, the marina issue, we hear from people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then we can address it.
And we've had a conflict at the Heights Ball Field 2 years in a row now with the road races, with the kids with the sports.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're supposed to be the ones looking at the calendar, but we don't really have the calendar.
No.
We don't have a calendar of events, do we?
Well, we could find it if we wanted to, but we haven't really done that.
But
Yes,
again, do people who voted for the select board want us to take, look at the issues that are on this agenda. Okay, there are really important issues. Do they want us to spend an hour on a Monday night that could be better put towards talking about one of these important policy issues? And I'm not downplaying the importance of the ball road race conflict, but somebody else can talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people who are involved in those 2 events, with the help of the special events committee, can hash it out. That is not, I don't think that's a good use of the time of this board, not because I think, we shouldn't care about those issues, but there's so many things that we need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so much time, and it just seems like that's something that could be better. The special events committee could then bring those parties together, sort it out. Half the time we end up sending people back to the special, we'll say, obviously there's a conflict, the folks need to kind of go and speak with special events and try and work it out. So it seems to me it would be just, if we're able to delegate that, that we should do so.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I think Megan had suggested the last time this was talked about briefly, that if we're going to do that, that we might need to have a public meeting. So that's the one piece that's missing now. I mean, for the most part, this board is coming into last minute and rubber stamping the recommendation of the committee. But the current process allows for the public to, who maybe has had a concern with a special event that maybe the committee wasn't aware of. It goes on select board agenda, it's posted in advance, and the public can come in and say, hey, we have a concern. So I'm not arguing against the change at all.
No, I
I'm
agree.
just
Thank you
saying,
for-
I think
for-
we
that
need,
makes sense.
I think we would need to add a public meeting to the process.
Maybe we need a public meeting or a public events calendar posted down
Here,
on the poster down there.
would be helpful.
And people can just come in, check the kiosk and go through the, month by month and see what's on the calendar. We could all check it.
Yeah, well, I think we should be given a copy of that at some point too, just to be able to look through and see if we anticipate any conflicts. So it becomes a little easier for us. We don't have to necessarily come in here not knowing what the conflict might be and find it, but
Yeah.
have it kind of presented to us as part of one of our package or meeting packets.
And now the one thing that, at some point, we still have to have that overreaching responsibility for public land. And we have to have the ability to intercede and say, for instance, there are people that recommend to me that the On the Waters event at the marina has outgrown that venue, although it's perfect for them because they take boat rides and stuff, but it's starting to become unmanageable, and the people that pay a lot of money for those slips are starting to have problems. And I've experienced it, try to go out in a boat with a friend, no place to park. And I drive back and forth, up and down, and the boat's waiting to leave, and it's like,
We wouldn't be giving up our power. We would just be delegating the sort of day-to-day routine. It wouldn't mean that we would be giving up the authority to deal with an issue like that, we could take an issue like that up on a one specific event basis if we know something is problematic. But on the regular kind of routine things that 99% of the events we approve as they are and we don't get involved, that could be something that committee could do.
The committee could come to us and say, this one's becoming problematic, we need some more guidance on,
Right.
are we gonna continue to allow this event, or maybe we change the route, or?
Or we can ask for it back. Again, if we're hearing from the public, if the committee isn't and we're hearing, we can let the committee know when the permit comes up for X event, we are actually gonna put it on our agenda. That will be one that we'll put on our agenda and discuss.
Okay.
I don't think that we're not forever abdicating, we can't, because it's in the statutes and it's in the charter, some of the way that this is broken down.
I guess
So-
it's just gonna make it more clear to the committee that they need to really check the calendar and make sure there's no conflicts and really oversee it a little more thoroughly. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, in fairness to the committee, we do. It's right on the form that we fill out that comes to this board is
And
other
that's a-
dates, other events that are taking place on this date. And the
Right.
conflict that came up between the ball fields and the road race, that was initiated when the road race wanted to change their date.
Right.
So they were initially approved for a different date that had no conflict.
Right.
And then they wanted to be on the same date that interfered with the
Ball
athletic
field.
sports, and that raised the dialogue, and there was a lot of dialogue back and forth. It just wasn't an easy solution to it.
Right, you're right, that form that they've started using is really very helpful.
And so will you get information to us about about the public meeting component of that?
Sure.
Because I think that's the only thing, to me, that seems like it's holding back us sort of
So we-
shifting.
So we can craft a proposal for your consideration when this comes back to the board for approval.
That would be helpful.
That'd be great.
What are the thoughts on what this public meeting would look like?
Well, I guess it would just be
Single Omnibus kind of a public meeting
on a number of the events.
right,
I think that makes the most sense.
I agree with, if,
Would be a
Especially-
standalone meeting, or would be put on towards a regular?
No, it wouldn't be us, it would be the events committee meeting publicly.
Yep.
So the special events committee, which doesn't meet publicly now, because at the end it comes to us, and that's where the public can weigh in. Special events would create whatever makes sense for them, to have some public
I see.
component, so the public would be able to weigh in.
The staff,
Maybe like a quarterly hearing on public events or
Right.
something.
Especially if you're publishing the calendar, that might show the conflicts of somebody say, oh, wait a minute, I'm involved in that committee, in that event. I don't think that's gonna work, you know, and they can come back to the committee and raise those issues specifically. You know, so, I think that's a process that could work effectively, but we need to see the big picture, and the people who are participating in those events need to see the potential conflicts.
So what I'm envisioning, so what we've been doing is holding meetings sort of as needed, and they're 2 or 3 times a year typically. And we do invite the applicants in to meet with the committee. So the change in the process would be, that would become a posted meeting.
Yes.
And, you know, we can talk about whether the open meeting law applies. I think technically it does not, because it is a staff committee. It's a pure staff committee that is meeting with the public and making the decisions. But regardless, it needs to be publicly posted so that the public is notified, okay, what are the events, what are the dates? If I have a concern, I know to come in, and Sam's suggestion is a really good one, that we don't just post the individual events that are going to be considered at that meeting, because there may be other events already approved that are within the same, you know, weekday, et cetera. So we can, you know, as part of that posting, post the calendar that is, to the extent that it's known at that time.
Yeah,
Okay. That
especially
sounds
if
like a
there are
good-
set-up days that are needed for a particular event, those could conflict with things that happen, especially at Marine Park.
Yeah.
That's a good action there. So back to what Nancy originally brought up is the focus of town staff, getting us focused. And part of that would have to do with the question here, what is the point of plans if they're not coordinated and do not impact policies and actions? So when we're considering some kind of an action, it'd be great to have a reminder. This doesn't really fall in line with your comprehensive plan, or this kind of is counter to what the planning board just voted, or, you know, those kind of votes. We should be able to remember those ourselves, but I think sometimes we do overlook them. And that's part of, you know, helping get us focused.
Yeah, the coordination, I had that as one of my points, between the planning board, local comprehensive plan, select board, strategic plan, making sure that I think that's a really good point, that they're all sort of coordinated. I'm just gonna pass my notes out.
Okay.
I think I gave you a copy, Doug.
Okay.
Is there an extra one? Yes.
Yeah, there's a couple
Okay,
here.
because I did not forget you, Peter.
Here you go. There's one more.
Thank you. And again, a lot of it was just taken from the charter review. The other, Doug, I think that one is a really good point. The other 2 points that I had was, when the policies are adopted, can we make sure that they're on the website and that they're accessible?
Yeah, here.
Because I actually tried, and I'm not the most computer literate person in the world, but it's difficult to get to the policies. And then this was a technical question. Wetlands and special permits, does the Board of Selectmen need to do them, or are we duplicating what the Concom does? Can you just, I'm sure we have, but
Yeah,
can you explain that one to me?
you have a role.
I believe I can.
Okay.
Under the current Falmouth bylaws, the select board does have a role. I would just note that that's unusual. Most towns do not have such a bylaw, and most boards of selectmen are not involved in those permits.
Okay.
The only time I feel like it's important is when we come into that navigable waterway issue, which we just had one come up, where a
Yes.
couple of neighbors were concerned. Unfortunately, apparently, there's one neighbor that's still concerned. I don't know if he's made any action on.
That was on a dock hearing.
Yes, it was.
Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah. I think what Peter's talking about is this Concom, where we have to jump back and forth with Concom.
Oh, because
Right.
there's,
It is the, yeah,
Right.
it is the docks, and that's
Yeah.
where the overlap is.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
and on some of that, I think it's important that we still kind of keep an eye on that, because the, did you have a relevant comment on this? You have to go to the
Go to the
microphone.
microphone,
Mike,
Charlie.
Charlie.
Yes, excuse me.
Don't forget to introduce yourself.
I'm Charles McCaffrey, Precinct 5. member of both the Coastal Resiliency and the Charter Review. And when the Charter Review was discussing what you're talking about, they included, along with the weddings, the special events, they mentioned that thinking it was duplicative. Putting on my hat as Coastal Resiliency, I asked that that be removed because I think that can become an important regulatory tool in addressing resiliency. It does in many ways duplicate what might be done under the wetlands law. But as it's part of the zoning, your discretion there is much broader. Under the wetlands law, state rules, for example, on erosion control structures, any property built prior to 1978 is allowed to have one. After 78, they're not. That's rather arbitrary, and it makes some sense from a social point of view. But as the shoreline becomes more and more dynamic because of sea level rise, the ability to review actions unrestricted by that limitation could become very important. And you have that authority now through the special permit under the zoning. I think we need to do more exploration on how you might broaden your implementation and when and under what circumstances that becomes important. But it's an important authority that I think you should retain. Because it's under the zoning, there's much more discretion.
Ultimately, I don't think we're gonna really get out of the final responsibility for any of these things.
Yeah.
We're just trying to delegate the day-to-day
Right.
so that it clears our agenda more.
And that was a good example at the Charter Review Committee meeting where we discussed the issues that you brought up, Nancy, the agenda. I had recently watched one of your discussions where you were reviewing a series of docs, and it got very complicated, and you discussed it for over an hour. And what struck me was you didn't have the analysis of the issues that were relevant, particularly property titles and literal or riparian rights, and all of that, the public trust doctrine, how those interact. You should have had that as background material for your discussion. So it does put more work on you, on the administration. But I think that's important to understand. These were legal issues that I was aware of that you were discussing, but it took a lot of discussion to get to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about, is
Yeah.
the length of debate that we have over the issues that we're not that keen on, really.
If you had the analysis, yeah. And that relates to the related specific charter revision that we did on requiring that procedures be developed to assure that actions are assessed for their consistency with policies of the board, the local plan, et cetera.
Regulations.
So that it will put a much more work on administration, but it can make for better decisions and more efficient use of your time.
But I think some of that would be some information that is just there and available. So often it'll be in our packet as a quick reminder, but we should maybe have our own little binders that have some of the information about what our responsibility is for certain things, right? And the 25% rule, with the docks and the waterways. Some of those things that when people onboard, it's less of a learning curve because there's some sort of foundational information for what we generally have to consider when some of those policies come before us. I think that would be very helpful. That way, staff doesn't have to necessarily put it together every week. Maybe it has in our binder our fiscal policy, our strategic plan, the LP oh my gosh,
Local comprehensive?
yes,
LCP.
Yes, LCP. A source, a little resource book that we each have, and you bring it to your meeting. And so it's incumbent upon us, that's less work. It's a way to sort of thread the needle. Staff will have to do some specific work for whatever that specific thing is that's on the item. But that background stuff, Julian and Peter shouldn't have to tell us how something is in line with the local comprehensive plan. We should have it in front of us, take a look at it. If there's something that's, highlights and jumps out, they can do that. But if we have that resource available, easily sort of assembled, and we can think about what things need to be in that binder, those are things we should be looking at, right? And we could, and that's what, when you take a look at your packet, and whatever Julian can sort of point us to, this is, in line with number 3 of the local comprehensive plan, then the staff, Diane, isn't putting that all in our packet. That's a lot of work. I mean, doing this is a lot of work, and it's important work. No one's complaining about it, but there are things that we could do that we could have at the ready. It's incumbent upon us to use those resources, to take a look at it. It's here in front of us, so if we have a question during our discussion, it isn't, well, can you look and see if if these two things are, are in concert, are they in conflict? We'll have it in front of us and we can look at that.
So I love the idea of having basically what you're describing is a reference guide
Yes.
of all of the important things that anything that comes before us could be cross-referenced in all of those different documents. I love the idea. And I think it is a lot of work in the beginning to front load and to create those binders.
Yeah.
But I think as we move forward, it will become less work in some ways because we have it in front of us and we can refer to it. And that is something that I think will guide our conversations, and that our conversations will be more significant and more relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But can I just say, though, I think Charlie's got a good point. At least it should be cited in the presentation so that we can go to those references, because we jump from issue to issue all the time. And we only have so much time to prepare for these things. Staff has got to go through all these issues anyway, so they can just simply list,
Couple of
cite, the particular issues, so that we can quickly go to our binders and find them and check it out and say, oh, that gives us different insight, because ultimately it is our decision. So I think citing those issues is important as part of the presentation to us, not necessarily providing us with,
Right, we have the books.
the information.
Every time.
Right.
You just need
Exactly.
to remember to go look at them. Like, for instance, I felt unprepared when we were talking about the dock hearing with that canal, because typically the docks don't extend out to that point where it's in that border of that 25%. You can pretty much look at the plan and say that it's not really a concern. But that last one that we had through that canal was at the edge of that point. And then to find out that the boat that's attached to the dock doesn't count, to me, was kind of troubling, because you're reaching the 24% point with the dock, and then you put a boat on there, and the beam of the boat could be 8 feet, or in the case of the subsequent letter that we received from the abutter, there is some concern that the owner is gonna buy a boat that has a 13-foot beam.
But that would be where we would make our decision, but I think in the binder, it would have what the law is. So we would know that.
Which is a reminder to check the law. And
So
I
we
could
would,
have checked the law, and I would have known for sure, instead of saying, we think that the boat's not included, and maybe that's correct, but it doesn't really sound like it's right to me. It sounds like
yeah,
your dock should include whatever size boat is gonna be on it, and it also should not impede into that 25% rule. So maybe we need to look at that bylaw, and if that's a state guideline, there's nothing we can do, but if it's a town rule, and actually if we read into it, we might find out it's not accurate, because I didn't actually see that.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on the 25% rule, but I just wanted to, just mention that, we don't conduct a technical staff review of those dock permits. That's just, that's bandwidth that we don't really have at this point, because that's an engineering, we would need to send those to DPW to check the engineering, to measure is it within the 25% rule or not.
but I don't think we need you to. I mean, look, we're not going to be able to offload everything. The idea is to just have more productive conversation. I actually think for the most part, aside from maybe having some resources like what you just touched upon, those hearings are pretty good. I mean, mostly what we have is the public having an opportunity to to express concerns and frustration. And for us I see them generally as like a problem solving, because that's what they almost always end up being. Saying to the engineer and the petitioner, can you do this? Can you do that? So that this neighbor who, will, if isn't satisfied, will go and file a lawsuit, won't do that. And everybody can kind of, get to where they need to be. Those hearings, we generally have attorneys, we have engineers, so I feel like we have people who can answer our questions to most of those hearings pretty thoroughly. And so if we have sort of the foundational information in front of us, then we can do our homework. I mean, none of this is going to be 100% perfect.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we're asking the town managers just to vet this stuff, but MES should be able to do it, because they deal with it pretty regularly, and they're aware of all the nuances of the regulations, right? And I don't want to rely on the applicant's attorney and engineer.
But don't we usually get something from MES saying?
But my point is, they could quickly list, the encroachments potentially, or the potential impacts of approving this kind of a dock configuration, right? So, I mean, I'm asking basically for the staff that are involved in these things on a regular basis to flag the sort of the limits of what we're actually being asked to approve.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we do that now, but maybe we just a little bit more.
I think we're getting hung up on that particular issue.
Right. Anything else from the charter review that we would like to take action on? The Liquor Commission, are we going to initiate that?
I would like us to look at that seriously and consider. Other towns do it, and I had a list, and I went to my notes, I don't know where it is. But I have asked before that if we could have town council look into how we go ahead and set that up.
We'll make that request.
And it's,
Can we quickly recap our list of,
Bless you.
bless
of
you.
what we want to have looked at, so we
Sure.
make sure we got everything?
Okay.
So I think what we talked about was having the town manager's report at the beginning to help structure the discussion. We talked about special events committee, sort of taking the special events and what we need to do. Peter was going to look into the public component of that. Creating a reference manual for all of us that includes important documents that we can then do some of the stuff they talked about with, looking at coordination.
Can I
right?
quickly interject real quick? When I first was elected, I talked about an onboarding document, and so I do have some additional ideas of things that I think would be really good for onboarding that
That'd be great.
might need to be in that reference.
That would be
So
awesome.
I'd like to include those.
Yep,
Okay.
that'd be
We
great.
talked about putting that online, right, so it's easily accessed.
Putting it on, I mean, you can put it online, but also, I mean,
No,
I'm
for
yeah,
both, don't
okay,
get me
yeah,
wrong, but,
yeah.
but I think it's easier for us, to quickly search for things rather than have to go leafing through a binder or something like that.
But I'd like to have my binder as well at the meeting
Same here.
to go through, so I think both
Yep.
would be good.
And then.
Can I just go back, Megan, to, you said about the town manager's report?
Yes, I was just gonna go back to that, so, but
Okay.
go ahead, this is your
But
list.
I was just going to say that included in that report should be that analysis, precedent, legal constraints, lay out the option. It's sort of like, make your case, and then explain to us, back it up with why you're making that recommendation. Because I think that's really important. Because then when we get it, we can look, okay, so he said that there are really 3 options here, but this is his recommendation. We can then sort of explore those 3 options on our own. But it's all laid out in front of us.
Or,
And it might be up to
even,
us, we might have our own idea and be out of the box, but.
Right.
or
you've got a
we don't have to
professional
reinvent the
opinion.
wheel. So in
Exactly.
other words, if
Exactly.
Julian says, this is what I recommend, we don't have, and there were 2 other options, we don't spend an hour and a half of us talking about maybe those 2, generating from the board, oh, what about this, and what about this? We
Yes.
have some initial discussion as to why those 2 options perhaps were not favored by town manager. I think that would help structure
Be
the
really
discussion. Answer some of the questions that sometimes take a really long time to get to.
And that will sort of guide from a discussion down to what are the most important questions that we need to answer during the discussion to make a really informed decision. So, I'm sorry, Megan, I just
No,
wanted to make
that's
sure
what-
that in the town manager's report, that was an important piece for me.
And then
Okay.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I want to make sure we deal with Angie's question of what did we decide in this discussion?
Yep.
And then the last one is the Liquor Commission.
Can we also touch on the order of the agenda?
Yes.
And am I correct in that hearings are the pieces that we have to stick to the time assigned?
You just can't start before.
Okay.
You can start any time after, you just
Okay.
can't start before.
They have to be here.
They have to have an
They have to
opportunity.
they have to know
Opportunity.
that,
Got
you
it.
know, so you
Okay.
just, we
I
don't
just-
have, the old practice that we had of interrupting what we were doing is totally inefficient. There's no need to do that. We don't have to interrupt right at 7:30. I understand people have attorneys, but if we need to finish up one conversation, we used to sort of abruptly, as soon as it was 7:30, stop whatever we were doing. We don't have to do that. We just can't go before. So we can think about where we put it on the agenda. Maybe those, maybe we think about putting that, we always use 7:30. Maybe realistically, we hardly ever get to hearings at 7:30. Maybe we push them back
Or if we
to
push the.
8, or
well,
maybe
if
we pull
push
them
the-
forward, or
If we
whatever.
push the administrative orders to the
the
end,
end.
we will get to those meetings at
Yeah.
7:30.
Right.
And keeping in mind that we put time limits so that people can structure what they need to say, the most important parts, and then holding them. There are times you can't hold it, right?
And it gives them a reasonable
Right.
expectation of what their time is allowed, what we expect it to be.
To frame what they want.
Sometimes it goes longer, but
To frame what they
Can
want.
I put a suggestion out or a thought? On the time limits, running a select board meeting is incredibly challenging for any one person. And one tactic that I've seen other boards use is to have a separate timekeeper.
Yes.
So it takes, it does a couple things. One, it allows someone to focus on the time, so the chair can really focus on what's being said. And secondly, it sort of spreads out the responsibility so that the timekeeper could, offer it up, and the chair can still,
do all of them in
agree
one
with it or
together.
not. But it just, if,
Yes.
if the board really does want to try to enforce those time limits, it might make that easier if you designate someone. And it could be a board member or a staff member.
Doug Jones was really very good, and he did that for a long time, where he would be the timekeeper for public comment. And if we said we were going to do 25 minutes on a conversation, he would be the timekeeper. Because I know it's hard when you're the chair and you're directing. You kind of lose track of time, honestly, because you're back and forth with folks. But he did a really good job. I think it's a very good suggestion that we have, that we have someone do that. This is Doug.
And I'm
would that
happy
be,
to do
Peter,
that.
you or a board member?
Whatever is your pleasure.
Or you just keep a little clock up here and keep hitting
Yeah,
it?
or use your phone.
Or your or your cell phone, you can
Yeah.
just do.
I'd be happy to do it if that's what you would like.
It'd be good, I guess, to have a reminder.
And
I
I'm,
do let people ramble on sometimes.
I'm happy to do it, Peter, because I know you take notes as well. So just
Oh, yeah.
whatever
Well,
works for
maybe
you.
it used
doesn't
to
matter.
Yeah, I know Doug did it when he was vice chair, and then he used to also just,
The one other thing that we said was we were gonna make sure that the policies are all put online and easy to find on the website.
And the consent agenda.
Can you explain what that is?
I'll let,
So the idea of a consent agenda, just like town meeting, is you enumerate all of the items and you take one vote.
well, it's
A
like a
blanket
blanket
vote.
vote. Yeah,
Yeah,
is
it's,
how I
it
understand
could be, it could be a small time saver. I would say it's, the board already has administrative items, which are implicitly,
Yes.
we're not expecting presentation and discussion on these items. But, we could certainly try a consent agenda. It might speed things up a little bit more.
So it's like a blanket vote.
Yes.
And if any board member has a concern about a particular item, we
You
pull it out
hold
for
it.
discussion.
You hold
Right.
it, yeah,
Right, it
just
just-
like town meeting.
It puts a little bit, I don't know if it puts more onus on you, but the board members need to be sure,
What they're
going
voting.
into that item, and you can hold it and name them individually, but you just want to make sure that, if there's a question, that you've thought about it in advance, so that you're ready to hold it from that.
and until we have a liquor license commission, we should, I would presume, be able to do the liquor licenses as part of the consent agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what, even now, it's a practice, it's not a legal requirement that you read all of those licenses.
Oh. But we have to read hearings, though.
Hearings we do, yeah.
Licensing hearings for individual new licenses or change of license, yeah, that's a hearing, and that cannot be consent.
Right.
But the annual
Changes
approvals.
in manager and things like that, you don't need to.
But right, sorry.
Yep.
The
So-
annual renewal could be done without.
Right,
reading.
anything that we would normally just do without a hearing could be on the consent. So if we can chunk that, that would, I think, be really helpful. All the things that can, and maybe that's the title, instead of administrative orders, I don't know, maybe it's administrative orders, consent, whatever, just so.
I think Harwich does it as a consent
Consent,
agenda.
okay, yep.
And we could also do that at the end, right? Because that's a quick one, and we're not expecting anybody.
Right.
So,
And there's the last thing, this has been a pet peeve for almost 6 years. Can we please put the people who are going to volunteer for committees? It just should be like one of the first things we do.
Yeah.
I think it is the most, like, inhumane, and frankly, I think it's insulting that we make people sit till 10:30.
I agree, and I
And half the
often.
time, we know we're going to approve them, number one, because they're amazing, and number two, there's not, very rarely do we have a lot of competition, so we don't even have much discussion, and sometimes we don't even, because we're running so late, we don't even hear from them, and they've
Right.
sat here for 3 hours. So I just
Mm-hmm.
really would love to push that towards the front.
could we add consideration also for town employees having to wait and wait and wait? I just feel like they've worked all day, they're coming in because obviously the town manager has asked them to be there for something. I just want to be respectful of that. If there's a way to move it up sooner, I would request that we do that.
See that? We should have done the charter review at the end.
But let me
We're not
remind you
following
that.
our own suggestions.
I know.
Let me remind you that some of these hearings, people are employing attorneys and engineers who are on the clock.
Yes.
So I think that's why these hearings are at 7:30, is so that we can get through those in somewhat of an expeditious, so that the applicant doesn't get a higher bill as a result of us putting it at the end of our agenda. So just keep that in mind. And those attorneys and engineers don't come cheap.
I agree, and I think it's all about balance, Sam, and I get that. I also think that people like Peter McConerty, who's been working all day, who waits till, 10:30 to speak on something, I just want to be really,
Yeah, there are plenty of times we don't
Agreed.
have hearings, there are
Just
plenty of
remember,
times.
you and I set the agenda
Agreed.
for now, so
so we're
we don't have to
responsible.
pay attention.
Oh, geez, okay.
Exactly.
I might be shooting myself in the foot here. But so to wrap it up, I want to really thank the Charter Review Committee. I think they did some amazing work, and I think your suggestions will help us do our jobs better.
And I think they've gone above and beyond by providing these suggestions to streamline our effort. It's outside of the charter, but it's helpful.
Agreed.
Thank you.
So next, if we're done with that, we've already summarized everything, I think.
I think we did good.
Discussion of short-term rental revenue and allocation of rooms, excise tax revenue, including short-term rentals, hotel, motel. Jennifer, would you like to tell us your thoughts on that?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How is everybody?
Morning.
I'm gonna I think it's gonna be easier. I did some bullet points here, because this is gonna get a little bit complicated. Hopefully I can explain it not so complicated on how we wanna maybe approach this policy. So I'm just gonna put this in and, probably walk through some of the bullet points. And I'm not the most, at least we're not on Zoom. Zoom is not my friend at all.
Never give yourself enough credit, Jen, you're fine.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so let's just talk about this. Okay, so first of all, let's take this, a lot has been done in the last few months regarding how we want to approach revenue for affordable housing from the town side, right? And we've had discussions, there's been a report from the Falmouth Housing, Affordable Housing Committee, they had a subcommittee, and they've come and they've presented. And so there's been some recommendations to approach this that have been, voted for. I'm gonna take this mask if it's okay, it's easier for me to talk. So one of the recommendations was to increase the 1% of the hotel motel short-term rental and take that 1% and put it towards affordable housing. And that was passed by town meeting, and that was effective July 1st, 2022. That's when we'll start collecting.
I don't think that's really accurate, because prior to the town meeting, we specifically addressed this with an agenda item to discuss, and I made a motion to the board at that meeting prior to town meeting that we make a new main motion.
Oh, I'm going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just going way back. This is before the meeting that you had at town meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I might?
Yeah, please.
Jenna, I think the confusion is the title of the slide says short-term rental.
Oh, okay,
And
but I put hotel motel, that's why,
So so what Jen is saying is that the town meeting vote was for a 1% increase to all of the rooms tax revenue,
That's correct.
not just the short-term rental.
right,
Right.
I said short-term rental, hotel motel under it.
Yep.
So, all right, so when,
But to direct
Okay,
that
go ahead.
1% to the affordable housing, I don't think we really made that directive.
okay, all right, I'm gonna, how about if I just tell you how I understood it, and then you can correct me where I'm wrong?
Yeah, just go
How's
through the
that
whole
sound? Just
thing.
because, you know, in order to put this in the financial policies, and I actually do put the warrant book together, so these are the discussions that I understood in what was written in the warrant booklet.
Right.
So I understood that we put the 1% increase on the town meeting warrant booklet way back in, I think we closed the warrant in September. And so when we put the warrant article into the warrant booklet, there were two articles on there for affordable housing. One was to increase the hotel motel short-term rental by 1%.
Right.
And the other one was the community impact fee. And they were to be allocated to affordable housing, right?
That was the original language.
That was, okay, thank you. So that was the
That was
original.
what was in the warrant booklet.
It was in the warrant booklet, right,
That's
because
what
there
we
was
sent
a,
to town meeting
and that's where I was getting at, so I just wanted to go through my understanding. Because,
It wasn't the ultimate vote, it was the.
no,
She's getting there.
I'm getting there, I'm
Just
just,
going through the whole process.
the
gotcha.
reason why I go through this is because I wasn't there for the original vote. I was, before town meeting, I wasn't aware that this was even going to happen, so I tell you about how I look at it, so I can help, you know, really put things together of what the select board intended to do. Because when I'm not involved and I make, and I'm, managing the finances, it's kind of hard to implement, and that's why I'm just trying to, walk you through this way.
Can we just make sure that we don't do that again? That
Yeah.
if we're talking about something like this that would impact a fiscal policy, can we make sure that you are at those meetings?
Yeah, this came about 15 minutes before town meeting convened.
Okay, because it would be really important to hear from you what your perspective is, so that we're not here in this position again, where it seems like there's some confusion.
If I could, not to belabor the point, but just in terms of why, how this played out and why it transpired, and the reason that perhaps Julian didn't think it was absolutely necessary for Jen to be at the meeting, the select board meeting before town meeting. She had a finance committee conflict anyway. But the sequence of events was, there was a written explanation in the town meeting warrant book, and there was a suggestion from the moderator that in order to make town meeting more confident in the explanation, that there should be a select board vote to adopt a policy to implement that explanation. We crafted a motion with input from the finance director and legal counsel. We recommended that motion, but then the board went with a different motion.
Mhm.
So that's why it wasn't, and I think it was actually, we ended up with two motions.
Two choices.
Two choices, but that second choice was not vetted. Jen and I and Frank were not aware of that second choice in advance of the agenda being published. So that's where we got a little off track.
So, putting the warrant to book, because there was a lot of discussion regarding the recommendation. And the recommendation, a lot of people wanted in the recommendation that this money is going to affordable housing. But when I spoke with Frank, this was just increasing the tax. And so when we increase the tax, we have to send all the paperwork to the Department of Revenue. So I didn't want to confuse that in the recommendation, because you legally can't do do that with that recommendation, because when the money comes in, it has to go to the general fund.
Right.
And so that's why, and I said, we'll make sure we definitely put this in the explanation. So I'm just telling you from my perspective. And so, moving forward, okay, that's how we were going to do it. And then when I went to town meeting and was told there was a different vote taken the night of town meeting, it confused me, so I was like, okay, how are we gonna, weed through this? Because that's a lot of money, and when I was looking at the actual, thinking about an actual calculation, so you have the 1%, which includes short-term rental, hotel, and motel, right? But then the board voted all short-term rental. So then you'd have to try to figure out what that extra 1% on short-term rental is and try to weed out the hotel motel. And I had another concern, and it's just the way, and I want to try to word this properly, and I don't want to try to offend anybody by this, but I've been working here 9 years, and I worked in a lot of other communities as finance director and town accountant, and I've had to make, because as town accountant, you have probably powers under Mass General Law to say yes or no, no matter what anybody says, right? You have some legal aspects to it, and I supervise that function. But I've always governed by what was the intent of town meeting. So, when we go to look at an appropriation, you get a lot of questions. Can we use this money for this article, for this? And it was always, is it within the scope? What was the intent of town meeting? Because it always comes back to that. So after, this vote was taken, because town meeting, this went on the blanket vote, and there was a lot of discussion, and it was in the explanation that the 1% was going to go to short-term, the 1% was going to affordable housing, and then the board took another vote. And then I was trying to look at the calculation. I was concerned that now we're not giving the extra 1% to affordable housing. We're doing all short-term rental. And there really wasn't any discussion. And even though you can say, well, it's more money than the 1%, I always get concerned from my position. When we brought something to town meeting, we told them what we were going to do. We've had petition articles over the years. I know Dan Scherer brought one year, and he wants to see all the debt exclusions in the warrant booklet, and we've been putting that in the warrant booklet for years. So it's like, what does town meeting want? We want to make sure that we give them what they thought they were getting. So that was a concern when I presented the budget, because then I looked at the motion and what you all talked about, and I was confused by it. So when I I said, let's really bring this up in the budget presentation, and then when I brought it up in the budget presentation and you clarified, no, it's just all short-term rental, it's not the 1%, then I was like, okay, we really need to clarify this and let the public know what we're going to try to do.
I think we talked about it several times prior to the printing of the warrant book, and I thought we were in agreement that the short-term rental would be applied towards affordable housing. And when the warrant book came out, I was surprised that, I thought there was a consensus on that, but I apparently was mistaken.
I don't think so, Doug.
Never voted.
Yeah.
I agree, Doug.
Okay.
I think it was a last-minute thing, so I think that, they're on the right track in this case.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doug, you're correct that it had definitely been discussed as a possibility.
Right.
It was raised, but I know that we had the written explanation to the board, and there was no disagreement at that time, about the written explanation that it was going to be 1% going to affordable housing. I think it was after that that you might have raised it, and then there wasn't a vote until the night of town meeting.
Okay.
And this can be changed in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we did change it.
Well, I'm just saying it didn't go before town meeting in that form, though. That's what Jennifer's basically saying, in a written, explicitly, explicit to the town meeting members what was being voted on.
So are you saying that our vote prior to town meeting to make a new main motion to use all the short-term rental for affordable housing was not really legitimate, or it doesn't apply to town meeting?
Was the motion amended on town meeting floor?
I spoke at town meeting and I said we took a vote prior to this to recommend a new main motion. It would be short-term rental would be all.
Mr. Chair,
Look, yes.
if I may, I think there is no sharp, definitive answer to that question.
That's the problem.
So,
Right.
right, so legally, so let me sort of walk through it one step at a time. Legally, the only thing town meeting did was say, we're gonna increase the tax by 1%.
Yep.
That's the only legally binding element. Now, there's a very important secondary element. What was the intent of that legal action? And for, a month or so leading up to town meeting members had a written explanation that told them one thing, right? The 1%. What makes it really confusing is that this was approved on the consent agenda. Now, you spoke to it before the consent agenda vote, but, it was, I don't know how well absorbed that was. There wasn't any opportunity for dialogue or question. There wasn't a presentation, that put anything
discussed if
in
anybody
writing.
held it.
Right, so again, I'm just saying, not that your vote sort of didn't matter, not that it, technically absolutely happened and has to be followed. We're in this gray political area, is where we are, is what did town meeting really understand and come away with? And I think what we, as staff, are suggesting is, it may not have been totally clear to town meeting.
And I think if the board has some confusion around it, I can't imagine how the town might be confused. So I guess my bigger concern at this point moving forward is, do you, and Jen, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have a plan?
Yeah, you have a recommendation. I was
Yeah,
gonna
that's part of
get-
her presentation.
I was gonna get to that.
Oh,
I'm actually
sorry.
gonna take this,
I
I'm taking
apologize, I
this
just-
off, so we're gonna have a discussion, because I think this is just gonna confuse everybody. It's really my talking points. So I'm gonna take it off for a second, and then maybe put it back on. So I just wanted to let you know how I looked at it, and, and to be honest, I've always said this to a lot of people: if I don't understand what we're trying to do, then nobody else is gonna understand what we're trying to do, because I actually understand, finances and what we can do. So I try to simplify it. So when you look at, so that's like that's where we stand right now. So when I look at, and I just want to remind the board, and I did in my budget presentation because I think it's just important, is that when the legislature voted to tax short-term rentals, this has been going on since, I used to work for the town of Chatham. I started there back in 2003. And we were talking about it way back then. We really wanted the legislation in order to tax short-term rentals. It would be a great revenue source. We get an influx of people. And we've been trying to, really lobby the legislature to enable us to do that. So we have been doing this for a number of years. And so when this finally passed, we were all excited, but we never really knew how much money this was going to bring in. There was really no way to estimate that revenue. So we wanted to get it, have it come in and see, where we were. Unfortunately, what happened was the pandemic hit. But before that, we had a joint meeting with the school committee, and the school committee had brought up, because we knew we were going to get all this extra revenue, they wanted some of it. And a part of a net school spending formula, when you look at our estimated receipts, there's certain part of that with growth that is allocated to the school department as part of a formula that the state does, and when they try to figure out how much Chapter 70 money that they get. So I go back to that. So when we had the discussion with the school, and what my recommendation is at that point was like, I really don't know how much money we're going to bring in. Let's, get a year behind us, see how much it's going to bring in, and then, we can discuss some sort of allocation. And then the pandemic came about. And then, if you remember, at that point, when we put the budget together, we didn't put any money in the reserves. We actually decreased state aid. We put some free cash to it because we had no idea what the impact in the economy the pandemic would have, because people weren't traveling, meals tax, we just really had no clue, and we had to come up with a balanced budget. And so that, okay, go ahead.
I could just mention that, when the bill was first introduced to tax short-term rentals, I was reminding staff all the way along that I felt like it was for affordable housing. So, I mean, I've never wavered on.
I know, but I think,
Let her finish up,
I'm
because
sorry.
I don't want you to interrupt. You can come back and give your interpretation later, but I would like to have a cogent, linear presentation, and so I'd like to hear
I'm
Jennifer.
just saying it's part of the conversation that was from the initial beginning, so.
I know, but at the end of the day, it'll be the vote of town meeting. Do you know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think we just have to be really clear about that part.
And it's gotta be a procedural process that's followed to the letter,
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
So I just wanted to lay that groundwork, because not everybody was here, you know,
Yeah.
when we had that joint meeting with the school department. And so we were gonna share that revenue. And so when I look back on the revenue, when we get the revenue in from the Department of Revenue, they don't split it. They don't say, this is what was for short-term rental, this is what is for hotel motel. You actually have to request it. And so we've been requesting that along the way. So we have one good fiscal, not even good fiscal year, but it was part of the pandemic, but it was $990,000 we brought in short-term rental tax for FY '21. So I figured, let's use that as the base figure. And the reason I do that is because when the money comes in, it has to go to the general fund. We can't automatically divert it somewhere else. So we eventually want to get it into the Affordable Housing Fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we have to do that on an estimated basis, because that's how we do it with the Capital Stabilization Fund. So say the money came in FY '21, and then, so what we want to do is estimate it for FY '22, right? It becomes part of your budget. It comes back to that basic premise of reoccurring revenue for reoccurring expenses. So I'm using $1 million figure, because that's what we brought in FY '22. So what I would recommend at this time, and I think moving forward, this is just my recommendation. So if you take $1 million, $500,000 to affordable housing, $500,000 to the school department. Then take the additional 1%, which we think will be about $350,000, maybe to $400,000. So then you'll have a total of, like, in the beginning, because it's going to be estimates, because you have to keep your estimates conservative, because because
Can't
the
go over
economy
it.
can,
Yeah.
right? So the first year it would be an estimated amount into the Falmouth Affordable Housing Trust of $850 from reoccurring revenues.
And can I just ask the
Sure.
way that,
Let's
sorry,
be
go ahead.
careful. Let's try to get this presentation done, then you can come back, write a little note, come back and ask the question afterward, because I don't want to see this chopped up too much. I want to get the picture.
Thank you. So that, and it would be just like the capital, we'd write that into the fiscal policies, and that's not something that we can look at that every year. So right now, the revenues are pretty strong. I do question the breakdown, but all in all, if you look at all the revenues, they're very strong right now. And so we can look at that in hindsight. We can always look and see if we brought in a little bit more than what we thought we did, because what happens is when you set your budget, we have a conservative estimated revenue, right? Your local receipts. We estimate that conservatively. That's where your hotel motel is. So you have that base that you estimate supports your budget. Anything that comes in over your estimates becomes part of what you call your free cash at the end of the fiscal year. So we can always look back, and if we'll take the $1 million figure, but then if we find that we're bringing in more than that, that's being rolled into free cash, you can always look at maybe a free cash allocation as well. But at least when you do your free allocation from free cash, you already know what you have. You've already balanced your budget, and you know that was an excess amount that rolled in there. So what we could do is write the policies in such a way that it could be, a conservative estimate amount could be $850 to affordable housing on a reoccurring basis, and we can look at that, after the next year or two and see how those revenues are coming in. And the other part of that, too, that I would suggest is that right now, you have more than $6 million in your Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. Well, actually, you'll have more than $6 million because the Community Preservation Committee has voted to transfer $1.8 million. And they're very happy that there was a recommendation to put the $4 million in there as well. So as you approach, you have over $6 million, and I don't think there's any really large-scale projects there. And that doesn't include the $2 million that was voted for the affordable housing project on the corner of Scranton Ave. So you're in a somewhat comfortable place right now, but it can always be looked at. So that's a conservative figure, it's an estimate, and that can be reoccurring into the housing trust. And then you actually given a portion of the revenue to the school, which said that they need, and they're going to need it, because the 2.3% every year to the school is just not enough at times, and especially with, everything that they've been looking at. So I felt that, that would be my recommendation moving forward, and I think, again, I just, and you're getting close to that million, and you've actually doing what said, and what town meeting voted on was that 1% will go to affordable housing. So that's my presentation.
Go ahead.
So, a couple of things. So, we would have that $850,000 number, which would sort of be the conservative, we feel comfortable with that. And can we write in our policy, the second piece of what you said, which is that, that we're estimating this conservatively, and that if that revenue from that tax is more than that, obviously it's gonna go, that the policy is, sort of absent something unforeseen, that is a free cash allocation to affordable housing.
Yeah, you could definitely write that in your policy. I think the way that I would suggest it is, so you have two financial policies, actually. So you have financial policies that you voted in 2017, and they're just fundamental policies. They have thresholds, target percentages that we meet, and we've been meeting them. But the other thing is that you have a yearly budget policy that you vote in September. And that's where I would suggest to put it, because it's something you want to look on year to year. And we can definitely put that into the budget policy. But I do want to, I do want to mention this, because I want to give you the whole picture. And it's fine, but when you do this, and you take those, short-term rental tax, you do decrease, free cash before this 1 year that we had of 16.4 million, it was going down. And we had like 9.6 certified. This does decrease, this vote, or if you decide to take this recommendation, will decrease your free cash, which does take away from capital projects. But, it's priorities, right? And it's like, what is important to the board, and what's our main priority? So I'm giving, a suggestion and a recommendation that,
I appreciate your, the creative financing. Did you go on?
Yeah, just to clarify, if in September, we vote a fiscal policy that says we're gonna put at least 500,000, I'm just making this up, at least 500,000 in the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, and we end up where we have like 8 million in the fund in a couple years, and it's still sitting there, then we can come back in another year and say, we don't want to do anything for the Affordable Housing Fund this year, we're going to put all the money elsewhere. That type of policy we can change every year.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so, Jennifer, I've always appreciated that you always separated, recurring revenues for recurring expenses, and it's a way to dedicate money in the right path. To me, it was just more of a symbolic vote. If the Airbnb type, short-term rentals are creating a shortage of affordable housing, and I know they are, I feel like the portion of that money should be directly allocated to affordable housing. That's why I made that suggestion. I'm happy to work with the plan that you've arrived at now, if that's the best way forward. But remember this, that to have $6 million now is good, but we really need $6 million every year. If we're really gonna be on target to have 74 new units, whether we're supplementing somebody else's project, or making a project of our own, or endorsing the Falmouth Housing Corporation. I mean, it's not a small amount. It's really, 4 million to me is the minimum per year. And if we were putting in 6, we'd probably make some real progress.
No, I mean, I know that that's what was in the report. I will tell you, where's the $6 million coming from? It can't come from the operating budget, because you'll have major layoffs. We don't have that type of money.
You can't really budget our way. This is the problem with affordable housing. If you could budget your way out, communities would budget their way out.
Right.
Building is so expensive, and we're at such a deficit. We, as a community, cannot fix the affordable housing on our own. We can, and I think what we've been trying to do is think of ways that we can help to chip away at it. But we cannot fund, there's no way we can fund enough building as a community without massive cuts to other really important and frankly, critical services and positions. So I think the goal is just trying to get through this.
Yeah, I'd really like, and I'm not sure what the best approach is for this, but I'd really like to explore the idea of not having to build anything new and to renovate old spaces or potentially buying of old homes. And I know the real estate market is a mess right now. So I really think that we can be more creative other than just building new buildings in spaces where people don't want to have buildings built or without taking up open space.
I know it sounds good, but it's actually more expensive, but it's a tough one.
I know that a lot of, sorry, Sam, a lot of the, you know, I'll just say the NIMBY is, well, this is open space now, or this is whatever, we don't want to add anything there. Well, if there's already a building there, if it's already cleared, you know, I think that would alleviate a lot of that issue. So maybe it'll cost more, and that would be more incentive for us to get more money from the state or put more money in our trust fund.
You know, it should be a part of it because we're gonna have to do everything, you know,
Right.
from all angles.
Right.
Yes, Sam?
Well, and I think Angie pointed to it. I mean, this is a land use issue. Because, you know, there's not a lot of available vacant land that's not already under conservation restriction or already owned. You pointed out that today's real estate market is really hot and its properties are expensive. So there is a choking, if you will, of even the opportunity. Not to mention that you need a developer to apply for a subsidy for their project. And I think that's where we are right now. You know, we don't have a housing coordinator report on this, but I'm not aware, and I sit on the working group to just kind of help vet out, you know, applications, but I'm not aware of what applications have been submitted to the town. I'm in the dark. So that's an issue as well. So I don't know, Peter, can you give us a quick report? How many do we have sitting in our inbox?
None. You are aware, if we get an application, Sam, you're gonna be aware of it within a couple weeks.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying, it isn't just the amount of money in the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. We need applications from developers, and they need to be able to cite a piece of property that maybe they have a purchase and sale agreement on, so that they can actually have a commitment, so they can put a project on a particular property. So we've got a more difficult process than just simply putting money into the fund. And so I want to make sure we're conscious of that as well.
Well, I don't want to always just be subsidizing private development. I think we should look at an inventory of town parcels and identify some that we can do our own projects.
I love that idea.
But just getting back to Jennifer, I mean, I think what she's laid out makes sense. I think we are putting $850,000 isn't nothing. When we started all of our reserves accounts a few years ago, you know, as we started to build those up, you know, sometimes it was 400,000, 100,000, you know, each one is a different amount. But to have a you know, a basement level, and then we make just policy decisions each year about whether we have extra to put in. Some years we won't. We're gonna have to do whatever projects we have to do, and maybe if there's an overage of 400,000, maybe we decide that, you know, that really needs to be allocated to this particular project. You know, I think I wanna be aware of what she's saying, where we have to balance all of those competing needs. Capital projects, which we're gonna talk about, some infrastructure, that's massive, right? So I do think that we, you know, need to sort of look at the whole picture, but I feel comfortable. I understand the concerns you raise about how sort of the process unfolded, making sure town meetings vote, we know, you know, is honored, and we can always revisit this, and have a very clear fiscal policy that is, you know, again, I'm writing in notes of all the things that should be in our binder, and that's clearly one of them that should be in our binder each year.
Sam, am I missing anything? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
No, I just want to say, I'd like to have something from staff as to how we're actually going to, you know, the idea of looking at town property and identifying a process by which, we did this with that purchase of land on Spring Bars Road. You know, we said a certain amount for conservation and a certain amount for affordable housing, and now we have an affordable housing project with 40 units in it. I would like to see us, staff, to identify such properties and basically come back to us, working with the planning board, and planning staff, if you will, and come back and say, here's an opportunity for you, and then we can put out an RFP, which is the process that we actually used for that Spring Bars Road development. So I'd like to put an action item on staff as a result of this meeting to see what we could do in that regard.
Okay, appreciate that. I
Just
want to finish
clarify,
Jennifer's,
that's something that the staff undertook several years ago, and we're happy to do it once again.
yeah, we could.
And I just wanted to underscore that although it appears frequently that there's a huge inventory of property that the town controls, at the end of the day, it's very tiny. Most of it has conservation restrictions. Other parcels are landlocked. So it's, when we did it a few years ago, we were surprised and disappointed at the relative few. Is there an opportunity for a single-family housing unit here and there? Yes, that's sort of what it ends up being. And you go through a very time-consuming process to create one additional affordable housing unit as opposed to what we had, for instance, as you mentioned, Sam, at Spring Bars, 40 units, where you really have an impact in a positive way. So that's part of the dilemma. We're happy to do that.
There's got to be something more than just a single-family house. I mean, you got the old water department building on Palmer Ave, that probably could make pretty nice apartments, so.
And I would invite you to please include the school department, because they have a fair amount of property. The population's been going down. It's as much an issue for them, so there's a vested interest to provide more affordable housing in this community so that we actually would have more children. So I'd like to ask you to include them in it. I know way back, literally in the 90s, I think Peter Clark actually came forward with the idea of putting a project on the high school property. It never went anywhere because of a NIMBY, not in my backyard, opposition by the campus, whatever that street is that goes up off of. But, there's also property, a pretty good-sized property there where the school administration building is on Sandwich Road that might put in several duplexes or something of that sort. I think there are opportunities beyond what we list as vacant property for the town if we just ask the school department to participate in this as well.
Even, Sam, if it's not about land or where to place things, and I had made this request years ago, the school department does need to be a part of the conversation about affordable housing because of how it impacts classrooms and the schools overall. And that never happened. That's my first point.
And staff.
And staff, exactly. And so it tilts their budget, right? My second point is, I agree with Megan that Jennifer's plan, I think, really, in some ways, gets the board out of a little bit of a mess. And then my third point was, I think that if a previous select board committed to school money for the schools, we need to honor that. And so I like the way your plan divides this money up and gives the school department $500,000. My last point is, given that we have no projects in the queue, I still agree with putting the money in there, but I also think that we do have to balance and think about the competing interests when we look at the overall budget.
Okay. I don't think there was any previous board making that decision. That was just staff recommendation.
No, we had it.
That was at a joint meeting.
It was at a joint meeting.
I thought you had said a joint meeting.
It was at a joint meeting with
I'm sorry.
the school committee.
Okay.
And there was a discussion about that.
Yeah, exactly, because when you raise taxes or when you have additional taxes, throughout the town, the school does share in those. They shared in new growth this year, and so that was the discussion. And we weren't ready to have how much to allocate because I think it might have just been adopted and we had really no good way to estimate it because we hadn't done it before. We really didn't know what the short-term rentals were out there. Okay. But yeah, no, it was at a joint meeting.
Oh, excuse me then. All right, well, I'm not gonna argue it anymore. I'm fine with accepting it's not too different from if we were dedicating all the short-term rentals at, what was that, 1.3 million and?
990,000.
990, okay, and we're talking about 850, so I mean, it's pretty similar. And if it makes the paperwork more clean and seem more practical to everyone, I'm fine with it.
And so, just as a timeline, so I will amend your overall fiscal policies and bring that back to the board. Then in September, I'll amend the budget policy with the wording that you suggested, just putting that in there, but also about excess. And then, so this would be effective for FY24, because the new revenue comes in in FY23 and trying to, estimate that. But what we can look at is we can look at the free cash allocation. Okay, so at the end of FY22 and at the end of FY23, we'll look at free cash and see if there's something you might want to do there.
I just want to clarify, when you say September, is that at our strategic planning meeting, or is that just at a?
Yeah, no, that's, right, our strategic planning meeting is in June. September, I come before you, actually, I try to do it in one meeting. I bring to you the capital plan, and then I also bring you so the capital plan's for the November town meeting, but then I also bring the budget policy, which is for the next fiscal year. Because we start planning for the budget in September, but it's not effective to next July.
Right, I wanted to clarify if it was going to be part of the strategic planning or not, but it's going to be after that.
It is after, so you vote that actual policy. But you can always bring it up, obviously, in the strategic planning session.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah, no, real quick, I just wanted to ask, when you do those amended policies?
Yep.
Can you represent, I understand the budget, the 850 isn't gonna come until FY '24.
Right.
In those policies, can you articulate that commitment, and the piece about the allocation? We may not have the exact numbers, but
Yes.
So in general, what we just talked about here is we still wanna try to allocate available funds in FY '23.
Right.
To, affordable housing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and Peter, because I don't have a pen and I'm.
You'll get that?
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we'll work on it
Okay,
together with
thank
that
you.
wording.
Is there any vote needed to,
Yes.
So
okay,
we can clarify exactly what we're saying, and then we vote on it. Okay.
okay, I thought that was pretty clear. So 1% is added, will be going to the short term, and the rest of the revenue will be split between the schools and affordable housing.
When you say the rest of the revenue, so that's the total 6%?
The 5%.
Can I make a suggestion motion? Okay, just to make it clear.
Please.
Maybe the motion would be, move that the 1% increase in short-term rental, hotel, motel be allocated, per our fiscal policies, be allocated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and and $500,000 from the short-term rental tax be allocated to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and $500,000 be allocated to the schools.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you,
Okay,
John.
thank you for all that.
Thank you very
Very
much,
much.
Jennifer.
Want me to
Next week,
stay here for the capital, at
Yeah.
the podium, or do you want me to just sit down?
No,
and I'll
whatever
answer
you like.
questions?
we should have got we should have brought that portable microphone, huh? Well, you can sit up here if you like.
We got a spot right up here, Jennifer.
So Sam, this goes back to what you were mentioning at a meeting a couple weeks ago, that we need to be planning for these big projects that are gonna be coming. And if you had any of those thoughts that you wanted to share to kick this off, I'd be happy to defer to you, otherwise I can get started.
No, my concern is that we got the operating budget, but I'm not comfortable that operating budget includes the planning processes that we need to address things like sea level rise, coastal resiliency, the affordable housing issues. I mean, we're the board of directors essentially functionally, but we really are looking to our executives, our staff, if you will, to make plans and also to propose how those plans are going to be implemented.
This is why I asked.
And so that's my concern and an element that I feel like we've been missing. We have lots of input from the Coastal Resiliency Committee and Affordable Housing Committee. We get special housing production plans produced and what have you, but we don't see how it's going to get implemented. And I don't mean that it has to be in a specific budget, but I want to see how we can plan to implement these things. Because it's more than just balancing the budget. The budget should reflect the processes by which we address some of these really strategic risks that the town is facing. And I don't think anybody could question, the coastal resiliency issues that come along with sea level rise and climate change. That is a very well-established scientific fact and is in the news and being presented to us all the time. We have Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute that's spending an enormous amount of money to raise their docks up and even make them flexible enough so they can raise them up again in the future because of their expectations of sea level rise.
Yep.
I mean, it's here, and I don't see us doing the appropriate planning for the town to start looking at the threats to all of our infrastructure, not to mention to citizens' property.
Okay, and so that's why I asked Mr. Suso to include the capital improvement plan, which does look out as far as fiscal year 31. And so I think that if we're talking about these large investments, this is where we're gonna find it. And this is where we need to insert it. If we feel like these are things that we're gonna spend money on, this is where we'll,
That's the numbers.
yep.
I want to see a narrative. I need a narrative to know how those numbers were actually estimated, because I don't think there is any narrative behind it.
Okay.
I
well,
want executive plans, if you will, in a narrative form that says, we've got money here, here's the backing behind, this is the basis for our estimates.
mhm. I think right now, the money that we have in here for like coastal resiliency is just a guess, because we know we're gonna spend something, so there's just something in there.
So I think
So
he's
we
saying he
should-
wants more of a plan.
We
so-
should be able to do better than that.
Right, exactly. So that's why we're talking about it. So I guess what we'll have to do is identify what projects might be, and of course, it's gonna start out with engineering and planning of what would be, whether we're gonna do a beach nourishment project, or, if it's potentially elevating a roadway down in Woods Hole, or whatever those projects might be, we need to start budgeting for the engineering and planning of it now.
Right.
Please.
So I think that the way that makes sense to me for how we go about doing this is that we, as a board, along with some staff, maybe the folks from Coastal Resiliency, DPW, engineering, MES, that we actually create some priority projects, right? So we look at, there's lots of different competing projects, but we know some of our really weakest places. And that we have a discussion, it's not for today, but it's probably a Saturday meeting like this, where we really talk about what projects make us more resilient, which projects protect really key infrastructure, even in short versus long term, and that we start to, because I see that this is, I hear what you're saying, Sam, there's a narrative, but that narrative honestly should come from us.
I
And then-
disagree. I'm sorry, but the way boards of directors and businesses work, they basically say, staff, we need a way of addressing this issue. And we rely on staff to come back and say, this is our thoughts on how you can do that. Sure, the board can change that. But it isn't up to us as volunteers, essentially. Yeah, we get paid some little bit of money. It's really our staff that's supposed to provide us with the expertise. Just like we were talking about vetting these special events. Let the staff weigh in on them. Let them come back to us and tell us, these are the conflicts, these are things you need to consider. That's what an executive.
I hear what you're saying.
Officer of a town or a business or anything else should be doing for the sake of the board of
But
directors.
we need to come up with the projects ourselves.
No,
I hear what you're
disagree.
saying, but
We have the threats. They should be able to tell us how to address those threats.
Well, except that I think here's what's different. This isn't like a finite, sort of simple project, right? Some of these are policy-driven, because we are
Actually,
going to
couldn't agree with you more.
potentially have to abandon certain property in town. We may have to, we are going to have to make really hard decisions that impact residents.
Agreed.
And so I think that, we help direct some of, so I'm just gonna take, let's think about Surf Drive, right? We've talked about the real
I don't want to only be
problems there.
focused on coastal resiliency, because we're about to have their report, and we can come back and talk about the financial implications of that, but I'm
But
thinking of,
any large-scale project that we want to direct.
Right.
I think that we have to outline our priorities, and then we say to staff, these are, so if we're focusing on large infrastructure, these are our priorities. We want a new fire station somewhere else, or we want this road to be elevated, or this particular shoreline to be protected. I think we have to, I agree that the information, the how do you do it, the numbers, the specificity has to come from staff. But I think when we're talking about large infrastructure, large-scale projects, we have to direct that. Do we need information from staff about it? Yes, we probably will. There are infrastructure issues we may not be aware of, but I think that at the end of the day, whether we talk about coastal resiliency or, at the end of the day, sewering, those are really big policy decisions that I think we have to take some accountability for. So I think there's a marriage of the two things. I understand what Sam is saying. If we don't have specificity, if we don't have expertise from staff, it's hard to make good decisions about priorities. But at the end of the day, I think we have to make we direct those priorities.
So let me
what
just,
you're
let me
saying is
just
we have to prioritize our strategic planning issues.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
we have recorded
Yes.
in this
I do
strategic
think we have
plan,
to, I think we have
but
to be more
But we haven't
specific.
prioritized.
We
So-
haven't done that.
Right.
Okay, fine, so that's the next meeting that we need to do, right?
So I just want to ask for clarification, Megan, sorry, make sure I understand. So I think I hear what you're saying, and if say the board said, okay, we have to raise a street in Woods Hall, that's a priority. I think then we give that to the town manager's office to come back with us and show us the plan to do that, because we've set it as a priority.
Yes.
But I agree with you that before we can do that, we have to assign our priorities.
I
and
do,
what
I
are the
think for it to be
projects.
productive. What I'm saying
Yes.
is for us to have a conversation that's more than what we
Yes.
keep having. I think we have to, Sam, you just articulated it really well. Look at our strategic plan, which is, it is generalized, and create priorities. And give 5 of those top, whatever, however we do it, to town management to come back and give us information on.
And that's where your plan comes from.
And one
Right?
thing, one thing also that I'd like to talk about today is, right now, we're talking about, for instance, for sewering, we've got $60 million down the road here planning for implementing the next phase of sewering. That made an assumption that we would use land-based discharge at the Allen parcel or a site similar to that. That 60 million would do that whole project if that's the choice that we make. But now the Water Quality Management Committee has come to the realization that to spend 30 million on land-based discharge, which is only going to take us so far, maybe we should be spending 60 or 100 million to pursue the outfall pipe. So where does that fit in the budget? Because if we choose to do that, and that needs to be done relatively soon, we're going to know within a year what the real cost will be. But we need to start plugging that in here somewhere, and then identifying, is that going to affect the tax? Because that's going to be town-wide shared. That won't be a betterment. That'll be a betterment of the whole town. And we'll all have to pitch in. So I'd like to, yes, please.
If you'd like, I do have some estimated costs for these large sewering projects, and if you remember, it's the capital facility plan.
Yep.
Sometimes you really see it on here, but I really have it on another plan, and I can put the graph
That'd
up
be
on the
great.
board.
Please.
I agree with you, though. I think we really need to think more strategically, because we have a lot more sewering that's gonna have to take place. Therefore, we're gonna have a lot more discharge that has to be accommodated. And I don't see any reason why we should be
Short-term.
taking only a short-term perspective. We need to think in terms of, a 30-year plan, not just 5 years, which is
Exactly.
probably the only capacity that this, groundwater discharge would actually provide us with.
Yeah, well, it might go longer, but it's, at some point, it's finite.
So, you want me to walk you through this a little bit, and then it might help the discussion? I know I have a laser thing here.
That pointer doesn't work on the screen.
Doesn't
You
work
can
on
use the cursor on the mouse.
Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, so right now we have, these are the large, I can't do that. So,
Just look down at the screen. Look down at the screen.
I know, okay. All right, thank you. So these are the projects that we have. So I'm just going to go back to fiscal policy because, you have the capital plan that you have in front of you. Amy will put out, the TASA project for the soaring out in 10 years, but you have other large-scale projects that don't show up on the capital plan because we have it on the capital facility plan. So what's the capital facility plan? Those are large projects that we pay for by debt exclusions. So debt exclusions are money that you raise over and a half the 2.5%. You go to town meeting, you vote the borrowing, and then you go to the ballot in May and you vote the exclusion. So the premise of the exclusion and debt drop-off. So we always want to pay, and since we're raising it above the tax rate, you always want to pay the same amount every year. But when we structure the debt, we pay the principal amount and then the interest declines over time. So it's not like a mortgage payment where you're paying the same. And so what does that do? When the taxpayers are used to paying a same amount, it decreases over time. So if you look at the black bar line, it decreases. And so what does that do? It gives us opportunity for other large-scale projects that are debt exclusions. And this is what we have on the plan right now. One of them, I want to remind everybody, Bourne's Pond, that's a large project, it's probably $6 million. We're looking at starting that actually in the spring.
Are there years on this, Jen, that just aren't showing?
Yes.
Can you just
Let me
scroll
see.
up a little bit?
Okay, can you see
thank
that down there? Yeah, oh, sorry about that.
Nope, that's helpful.
So Bourne's Pond, now, we voted that in 2014, but that was part of this, you know, it was in one article with Little Pond Sewer. So when we finished those projects, then we had some permitting, they had to go through the permitting, and then they were actually going to do it in conjunction with, when they get going in April, I believe, moving the jetties, something to do with the jetties, I'm not DPW, so that's going to start. So we have Bourne's Pond, because I have to put that debt in there, because we'll be paying the debt. And then you have the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, I've got an estimated $20 million in there. The T-Ticket school roof, which we just voted, and that will be, I think we're replacing the roof in the summer, we're gonna go out to bid in February. And then we have the Sandwich Road Fire Station, which will be coming to town meeting, this town meeting, for a debt exclusion, also with the $60 million sewer, wastewater treatment upgrades. And then we have the sewer expansion.
$20 million sewer.
I'm sorry, yeah, the $20 million.
The 60 is the sewer.
Well, 60 for the TASA sewer expansion I have in here.
That's right.
Right, but what's
Right.
coming to town meeting is the 20 million.
Exactly.
approval.
What's
Right.
coming to town meeting is the 20 million upgrade for the wastewater treatment plant and the fire station.
And
So-
that'll be debt exclusion, right?
Yep, they're all debt exclusions.
All of this is, yeah.
Yeah, so, when you voted the fiscal policies, we did, you did mention in the policies, like, I update this every year, so I look at it. And so I can put something on there when someone tells me to put something on there, and I try to fit it in so we don't have like a huge tax rate spike. However, the policies are yours, and I've said this before, if there's, you know, there's always, if there's some big project that you want to do, you know, depending on the timing of it, it might be a tax rate. You might, you know, raise your taxes for it, and then you can, you know, discuss that. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I do try to fit in timing-wise into this debt drop-off. And I do want to say what's not in here, but what has been discussed, I don't know if it's been voted yet, is a fire station for the for the Northwest Fire Station, we'd pull out a couple years, so.
Oh,
I
and
just
while
wanted
we're-
to put this up there so you could know that I've looked at it, I've done estimated debt schedules, and I try to plan out, you know, 20 to 30 years on how we can pay for it.
Can I just ask you a quick question? So just for folks looking at it, I mean, the positive piece, right, is that we have a lot of room to work with as you get those further years out, right? Because the debt drops off precipitously, and we don't have a lot of projects that
Right.
are adding back to it. So you know, just conceptually, in chunks of time, as debt falls off, we have that window of opportunity that we always call it to do some bigger projects.
But we'll find some things like new town hall, new police station.
Yeah.
You know. But while we're on that fire station, I just want to mention thanks to town staff and Mr. Suso for getting West Falmouth back online. Just a quick announcement, the fire station's up and running. We had a water heater break and a lot of damage and very unexpected, but thank you for putting that together.
Certainly, yeah, great team effort by staff members.
Yes, Sam.
Yeah, one of the things I don't want to, I fully understand controlling this. I think it's important to recognize that, you know, Julian touted to the Rotary Club that we have one of the lowest tax rates on the whole East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be giving opportunities to look at these more strategic challenges to the voters in terms of overrides. If we have a project that we think is important strategically for the town, and I'm not talking about in my time, I'll be dead probably by the time some of these things, but we should be presenting it to them and say, this is going to be the cost, and this is what's going to be the impact on your tax rate. I'm not worried about the loaners, you know, the people that give us that AAA bond rating. I'm worried about protecting our citizens. And I don't want to see us sort of artificially handicap ourselves as to how much we can put into infrastructure, and neglecting some of the big risks that we have due to sea level rise, for instance, or affordable housing, which is truly crunching our economy right now. Not to mention staffing of municipal employees and school department employees as well.
It's not out of the question, and we just did it with the public safety.
It's not our choice either. But we should be offering it to the citizens in the terms of referendums.
Okay, if we get to a point where we have a specific thing that we're going to recommend and permanently fund, sure.
And I just want to remind everybody, this is a plan. Plans change. They change all the time.
Right.
Now, a lot of the sewer construction, we borrow through the trust, the Clean Water Trust, and they give us 0%, 2% financing, which is great. However, they dictate to us when we start paying back principal and interest, and it's, a lot of times it's around 50% when the project is completed. So that's why we have the debt stabilization fund to try to, even that off. But I will tell you the $60 million SOAR, the soaring, that does include betterments. And so then that can get a little tricky because you're paying back principal on $60 million, and then you can't actually allocate the betterments until the project is completed, and then you start bringing in the revenue.
Right. And if we choose to go with the outfall, just say, for instance, $100 million, and where was that going to fit? Because we need to do that within the next few years.
Right, so the outfall is not on here, but I think you do know, there was a presentation, I believe, by Amy Lowell and the wastewater quality management, the Quality Management Committee, that there is an article, will be presented to you about the beginnings of the outfall, and there's some money allocated to that.
Yeah, we just
And
paid
so
about $98,000 to study it.
Yeah, and so that will start the conversation.
Right. But it's gonna come fast, because if we get that amount, so we're planning on sewering the next phase. I think we have capacity for the next phase.
Right.
Yep.
But the one after that's gonna come within like 5 years.
So it
And
needs
that
to-
we don't have the capacity for.
It needs to come fast.
Yeah.
They guess 60 million or less for the outfall.
That was just the original
Okay,
concept
well-
a few years ago.
No, that was.
Let's keep this to a controlled deliberation, please.
So I just wanted to, anytime there's a project, we can, depending on what your policy is, we try to, fit it in and see where we're at with everything, and in the schools needs too, as well, that we put on here.
Is this, let me ask that question, though. With your other, so this just shows the projects we know about.
Large-scale
Okay.
borrowing projects, probably over, 2 million.
2 million, okay, okay. Including the schools. Like, do you have their list from their
Yeah, I
capital?
do. It's in the 10-year capital
Yes.
plan. They don't really have anything that large.
Okay.
I know that they'll probably be looking at, and what I've been trying to do, looking at the free cash and the capital stabilization fund, because, if you pay cash, you're paying less for it. Really, my recommendation is not to get into the practice of, we want to do so much, but we don't have a lot of, we don't have the cash on hand, so we're going to start borrowing for smaller scale projects. We don't want to start borrowing for like fire engines or, things like that. Other communities do. So what I've been trying to, what we recommend is, so if it's like $1 million, $1.3 million, and there's a good balance in the capital stabilization fund, we would use that, or we'd look at, what the competing interests are for the capital that year, and maybe use free cash. So I know that the school, next year on their capital plan, I don't know if it's in here, but we've been discussing it, is they want to rehab the tennis courts over at the high school, and that's probably gonna be over $1 million, but we'll be looking at that probably, for free cash. But when you start hitting the 2.5 million, we really need to do those as debt exclusions.
Yes, Sam?
I think it's important also to mention that, the cost of money goes up every year. We're now hearing inflation of 7%. What we put off into the future is going to cost us a lot more. So we have to be recognizing that we can make investments now that will be fiscally better off for people who are around here for 20 years from now. And so we should not always be penny wise and pound foolish. Some of the investments are better made today because they're going to cost a lot more in the future. And the opportunities that are available for putting in infrastructure will probably be more constrained 20 years from now.
Okay. And if we were to plug in, I think it's 5 years from now, an extra 100 million to be safe, as you say, costs are always going up. to do the outfall, what impact would that have? How would we do it?
Well, you wouldn't be able to do it within your debt drop-off. 100 million's just too much money. It would be a tax rate increase.
Yeah,
I mean, I would do different financial models, and I could try to, look at what our, competing, large-scale projects' interests are, but, 60 million I can fit in the debt drop-off because I'm actually allocating the betterments, and that's why you'll see at times, and you might see it on this warrant, I'm allocating some free cash to the debt stabilization, just so, we don't spike the tax, there's a huge levy, tax levy bill that goes out, or tax bill goes out, and then the next year it's not as high. We really want to kind of steady it and not be all over the
do
place.
you have an idea of what a $100 million ticket item would be on the tax rate?
No, I can always do
Upfront.
that calculation. I have to go look at our total valuation. I can do the calculation, but you have to do how long would you borrow it for? You have to look at the interest.
What's available
For that, and what you would be, putting on the levy every year, and then there's a calculation with your assessments.
And I guess we should start to strategize whether that would be a permanent override or if it would be a debt exclusion.
Well, any capital project would be a debt exclusion, because you're borrowing the money and you're paying it off for a certain amount of time. An override, you're permanently increasing your levy.
Right.
So the best way to look at it is an override, if you're looking at your operating budget, a reoccurring expense every single year that's not, going down,
Right.
then you're gonna put it on an override. A debt exclusion is you're paying off the debt excluded over Proposition 2.5, and it's only for a finite time period.
Right, okay.
Remember, we also have county money that can offset some of these dollars, right? That we can go and apply for water quality management purposes, for pollution control purposes from the county. So we can offset some of these costs if we're sharp and get our plans together and bring it before the board that Peter sits on.
Or we can advocate for just getting the money directly to us.
I think, Sam, so there are two different pots of funds. There's ARPA money, which could be used for sewer infrastructure, but there's also the Cape Cod Water Protection Fund, which is annually funded, and that offers a 25 at present, and it may need to be adjusted over time depending on revenues and projects, but at present the goal is for that fund to be able to subsidize 25% of wastewater and water quality projects. So it really
That's
is.
what I was referring to.
Okay.
Right, so it really is, Mr. Chair, it's a whole hour-long discussion, I think. If the
Yes.
board wants to look at a $100 million project,
How do we
when
do
would we do it, how would we do it, how would we finance it? There's a lot involved, and there are a lot of, there's a lot involved just in the calculation, such as assumptions about these subsidies that are available. 0% interest, what does that, what do
Contingency
we
for
need
all
to
of
do in order to qualify for 0% interest?
And we shouldn't probably even use those. We should figure worst-case scenario, because by the time we get to it, those programs might not be in place.
So, yeah, so the point is, it's a long conversation that, we can certainly prepare for, but we can't give sort of off the cuff what it looks like today.
Because who knows what the environment will be 5 years from now? Interest rates will be higher, who knows?
Exactly, even construction costs, right? I mean, we're not gonna, the margin
not
of
gonna go
error
down.
of those estimates is going to be something,
Yeah.
it's like an 80% confidence level or something.
Okay,
you,
any
John.
other questions about the long-range infrastructure? I mean, we didn't
No,
talk
but I-
about the coastal resiliency because we have no clue what the projects would be, but we're gonna hear from Charlie in a minute and talk about the report.
Good.
No, but
Don't forget, not on our agenda though, is the whole broadband infrastructure, which is so critical for educational purposes, business purposes, and just simply, population communication. It's a new need that people have. So I don't want us to lose track of broadband infrastructure, which I don't want to just simply rely on the private business world to provide, because I think we're too much in the backwater of their best return on investment.
Okay.
just a quick plug that when we do our strategic plan this year, and maybe if we have a facilitator, I think a really good use of our strategic retreat, our planning retreat, would be around this topic of setting priorities for large infrastructure. It'll include coastal resiliency. I think we have to have a really in-depth conversation. It will require a lot of background information to go into it if it's gonna be productive, but I think that would be a very good use of our time and produce something that hopefully would be very, user, just sort of oriented towards action, rather than a broad kind of statement, that it would be very action-oriented.
Okay.
Can I request that we do our strategic planning over a course of 2 days, so that we work on priorities the first day, maybe touch on some topics, have a night to think about some things, and then continue on the second day?
Action items on the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I know one night to be one and done would be nice, but often I think about after meetings sometimes, after we've had some discussion, I think about something else that I would have liked to talk about or ask about. And I think for something as important as strategic plan, it'd be nice to have a night to think over what we've discussed and then continue.
Yeah, and I'd like to see us have a spring strategic planning meeting and then follow it up with a summer one where we can kind of build on it and answer some of the questions that should be asked, right?
Well, I think we're doing some strategic planning now, and I think that if the board is willing to do a couple more of these Saturday during the winter, I think is pretty helpful.
What might be helpful with what Sam is saying is if we had something in the spring where we gave some direction about what our priorities were. So staff could then have time to put something together for the summer where we actually kind of set the strategic plan.
Right.
That might make more sense. So have a meeting to generate some of those priorities, and then be able to have some weigh-in or some thought from like Jennifer, the numbers part, whatever, that might be really helpful.
And on the other end of that, I'd like to see time during either our select board meetings or additional meetings where we measure our progress towards those priorities. Because that's another piece that I'm not sure we look at
Agreed.
closely enough.
And Mr. Chair, I'm gonna need to go in about 10 minutes to catch my flight, so when we're off to the next subject, I'm just gonna go ahead and sit in the back, so I don't disrupt.
Well, given that, do you want to take out of order the Falmouth Net Board, which is a quick one, because the coastal resiliency report's going to take up the rest of our meeting?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, because I'd like you to be around for the vote on the Falmouth Net, because it's just a quick discussion of whether or not this board wants to be in the position of being the interim board, should the vote at town meeting be successful to create the municipal light plant. Right now, if we only vote to create the municipal light plant opportunity, this board will be responsible for the interim management of that entity. And I don't know what that really entails, but one thing I know is that I'm not an expert on internet infrastructure, and I feel like, so there was some question, and our Gaylord asked me if we were gonna be in favor of a secondary vote to town meeting to create this elected 5-member internet board. And Mr. Suso and Mr. Attorney Duffy commented that that may be early yet to be introducing that second vote. So we're gonna vote to create the municipal light plant, and then another alternative vote would be to create this elected board. And there's some thought, and Mr. Suso, you can, welcome to comment or not if you want to, on whether or not we should do both at the same time. If we don't do both at the same time, then we're gonna be the ones making the day-to-day decisions about operation of that board until the next town meeting comes along and we go to that next step. So I just thought I'd hear, and would you wanna
Yeah,
comment?
we got some input from the town clerk on that as well, as far as elections.
Okay.
Maybe you can summarize that if you would.
Sure, yeah, as the town manager noted, I had a couple of conversations with the town clerk and ran some ideas by Frank Duffy as well about these timing issues. And, certainly I think it would be timely to have a town meeting vote as along the lines of what you're suggesting, that if it's the board's desire to not serve as the board of trustees of the municipal light plant, but rather to have a separate elected board, you could certainly have a town meeting article to do that, to initiate that. However, I do want to just note the timeline, because the earliest, it looks like, in all likelihood, the earliest that board is going to be elected is April of '23, April of next year, not this year, because we can't elect officers for something that doesn't exist yet, right? So, and because town meeting and the town election are so close together, there isn't time for nomination papers and campaigning and elections after the town meeting vote in April, before the May vote. Now, we did look at the idea, well, what about November? And it would require a special act of the legislature in order to hold an election for the municipal light plant, even in November. And I'm assuming, you know, the idea being we have state election in November. So you could get it on a state ballot maybe with a special act. Also, by default, the election of of officers for a new entity are held at a town election, not a special election. So that as well would require a special act to elect those officers at a special town election rather than an annual town election. So that's just, again, the creation of the MLP, that could certainly be done, as far as I know, without, I don't know that there's any reason to delay that vote of town meeting. But in terms of when that body will be operational, that's looking like it's going to be May of 2023.
Okay, so really we're not missing any opportunities then by doing both at the same time. I mean, by not doing both at the same time. We can create the municipal light plant now and then come back in November and discuss the creation of the municipal light plant board and be ready for the following spring and May election.
Correct.
And there's no advantage. Mr. Gaylor, did you understand you want to come up and comment on that?
Well, Artie's coming up. You know, I think it's not a bad idea to actually ask our state reps to submit a special legislation. I'm not sure it's going to be a big deal. I think it very well could go through, and that would, you know, save us a 6-month delay. Costs are going up, what have you, but maybe even the availability of funds is going to begin to shrink. So I would be at least try to strategically plan to try to get that special legislation to the State House and see whether we can get that, you know, that opportunity to put those board members on the November ballot.
Okay. Mr. Gaylord, what do you think?
Well, this is the first I've heard that it might be May of 2023 before you could elect a board. And I certainly know, I don't know all the details, but I do know that other towns and so forth have done the whole process much faster than that. And, you know, I think we should be aware that there are huge federal, state funding opportunities now. A lot of those will go away. From the point that you elect a board, there's still a long process. The board has to get up to speed. The board has to write a job description to hire a MLP manager, try to hire somebody, and so forth. So even from the point the board gets elected, you are looking at a 6-month or more beyond that before it's able to actually do anything. And then the board and the manager have the responsibility of doing the detailed planning, coming up with budgets, all of that sort of stuff. So really you're talking about delaying things by a year to a year and a half in that action. You know, one of the things is that we did, 2 articles have been submitted at this point, petitioners' articles. One is to have the second vote to create the MLP, and the other one is to elect a 5-member board. The state actually allows for either a 5 or a 3-member board. We thought that, Falmouth Net thought that 5 was better. It allows more diversity, more expertise, and so forth, and it's less likely to get perpetually deadlocked in a 2-to-1 vote, which is what we've heard other towns have had at times. In that article that was submitted, we did not put a date for an election because we weren't certain about that. I would certainly strongly urge that it be no later than November of 2022, and that if we need to work with the state legislature, I mean, these types of special acts from the legislature are not uncommon, and they're pretty easy to pull off. We've had good local support from our representatives and senator, and I think this could be done, and so, that would be my urging.
Okay. So, is that a motion, Mr. Patterson?
Yes. So,
Mr. Patterson made a motion that we support the petition article, is that, what is the?
well, we haven't seen the actual writing on that. We're gonna have an opportunity to do that anyway.
Okay,
But that strategically, we plan to submit a request to the state legislature to go ahead and proceed with an election of a municipal light plant board at the November state election.
okay, I like that. Any
So
other comments?
I'll put that in as a motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, and we have a second? Was that a second? Yes. Yeah, come on up to the podium, please.
For everybody at home, can you explain the detail of your proposal? I mean, what exactly is the extent?
David, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Dave Moriarty, Falmouth resident.
And what's the question?
What is the extent of the MLC? What is their,
Municipal light plant?
yeah, is that a utility company?
The idea is that we could then have a choice if we want to create our own fiber net, internet-based
Does
service.
this have anything to do with power, electricity?
No.
No, it's just communications for.
So it
internet.
would have nothing to do with transmission of electricity
No,
or?
sir, it's just.
David, there's a state regulation that creates an MLP. It doesn't have to be providing power or other infrastructure type thing, but it does
Well,
allow.
most
and other towns have-
municipalities have them, and that's what they usually
And
are.
other towns have used this as a way of creating a broadband network for their particular town.
Well, why don't you just call it that?
Because the statute requires it to be called.
Yeah, there's
that.
only one opportunity.
That's a statutory language, because it's very old language.
It's got to connect to the state's
Well-
authorization.
Could you just put in that it has absolutely nothing to do with public utilities and is not a public utility?
If you go back to the warrant article that was voted, it has a good explanation that was voted last April. It actually references some of the statutory language, why it's called that, and the scope of what it is. So I think that's already been done, because the article.
So it definitely has nothing to do with
Nothing
a
to do
power
with-
plant or
No.
the town becoming its own utility company?
Correct.
Correct.
That was all in the explanation that was voted at. town
Okay.
meeting.
Yep, go back.
I just wanted to be clear about that because we don't really want that here.
So if you
Thank
take a look at it, you'll see that explanation.
I'm good with that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second to pursue the special legislation to allow the election of the 5-member municipal light plant board in November. And all in favor of that?
Let's clarify, to petition the state,
Okay,
so that we know what this is all about. This is petitioning the state legislature to allow us to do that.
okay. Everybody understand that? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I apologize. There's one piece of the process that I'm not clear on. Clearly, this isn't a petition that we could submit now, I don't think, because you have to wait for the town meeting to
vote it.
create the MLP. The piece that I know typically, if the town is going to petition the legislature, it requires a town meeting vote. So I will put that question to legal counsel and see if we need, in fact, a separate,
Special.
a third warrant article to petition the legislature to hold a special election in November and to place the election of officers on the November state ballot.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask a question of Art Gaylord? When Falmouth Net comes back in front of us to talk about this, will you share your financials with us so we know because I know you've been doing work, I think you've been doing fundraising and stuff.
Yeah,
Is that something you'd be willing to do?
sure. Do you mean the financials of Falmouth Net or the financials of the project?
Are you maybe we're on the same track. When you talk about hiring a manager, those funds are coming from Falmouth Net? Where would, because.
No.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, like, I'd like to. Because we would have to create that position in town government.
Right.
If it's supposed to come from town government, then we would have to create that position, go to town meeting.
Yes.
So it would be still another, I'm just seeing as you unroll your steps, right?
Right.
Say everything goes well and we can have this election and that happens in November. You wouldn't be able to hire, if the idea is that the
funds to hire a manager come from the town, then that wouldn't be able to happen until even April.
Right, because you have to create a position, it has to be voted on, and I'm thinking
Yes.
about who's financing him, and what do the financials of Falmouth Net and the project look like?
At that point,
As
it
we
won't be
move forward.
Falmouth Net, though. At
Right, it
that
won't be
point, it'll be
Falmouth
this
Net.
municipal light.
Right.
And that won't be
But
really
Jennifer has her
available
finger.
until they've elected a board and determined those things, so it's not gonna be.
Yep, but they can provide us with
Yeah.
an estimated budget and revenue
Yeah, we
stream.
will have
Exactly,
that. In
and what
fact,
if they've done fundraising, and just because if we're gonna be moving forward, I mean, I'd just like to see what their financial contribution, as we move forward, and
or
consider whether
expected
we're going.
contribution.
Right.
Okay. Did you?
Yeah, if maybe you take it up, I don't know if it's just strategic plan, but I mean, if you're creating another department with another position that we have to pay for, we have to put that into our priority list when we put the budget together, because, that impacts, new positions for public safety and things like that. So if we're creating a department head position with a budget, to get that amount sooner rather than later is helpful when we put the budget together, if that's a top priority of the board. And that's reoccurring. It's not something that, okay, they can pay for it the first year and then we pay it for the second year and move on, because that will be,
I think-
that department will be a new department for the town of Falmouth.
I think, be careful. Art can address this, but this is going to be more like an EDIC. It has its own independent revenue sources. Go ahead, Art, I'll let you
yeah,
do it.
yeah, this would not be a new town department.
And that goes-
It may be that the town would be asked to fund or partially fund the MLP manager for a year or two as it gets going. May also be that through state or federal grants or that position could be funded in that way. It's a little premature to understand all the details of that. And indeed, that would be something that the MLP board would be in position to analyze and, to make a recommendation upon.
Yeah, I was just pointing out and I know, you guys have discussed this probably, but as that planning and thought process takes place, that if it were some contribution from the town, even if it was only
Right.
gonna be for a year or two, the earliest that can happen would be April, so,
Of next year.
of next year.
Right.
Yes. So I'm just saying, when you were talking about your 6-month timeline and then hiring someone, that bumps that out. But, so,
Right.
anyway, I just wanted to
Gonna
point that
happen.
out.
It's a valid request, though. I agree with Nancy.
So we'll do it. And I just, just to clarify a little bit, I mean, we need to think about, it's maybe Falmouth, our job to do it. We need to clarify some of the language in a sense that this is Falmouth Net, as Falmouth Net Incorporated is a nonprofit, which is an advocacy group to promote this. We do not see ourselves as becoming the MLP or the operator and so forth.
Right.
But one or two of your members might choose to run for it.
That could be, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so as much information as you can, if you have some sort of projected numbers and whatever information you think you have.
Well, along that lines, let me just point that we did have the engineering study that we hired Tilson Engineering to do the detailed engineering design, and we expect their report in draft form next Friday. And so they have made great progress, and that will be certainly tell us more about the streets, the condition of poles, and all of that. It will also have a more accurate budget in terms of construction costs and material costs and so
Great.
forth. And
That'd
we, of
be
course, will
wonderful.
share that with you as soon as we get it finalized.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you for
very
that.
much. And next, the coastal resiliency report that we've been thinking of for a long time. McCaffrey, did you want to make any introductory comments, or do you want us to just kind of?
Well,
You need-
Charles McCaffrey, Precinct 5. former chair, Coastal Resiliency Action Committee. Along the lines of your discussion, and how do you prioritize and go forward with major projects? I think what Sam said is important at this stage. Adding expertise to town staff is critical and probably one of the most important things you can do, because we need to refine and develop, based on the data in our report and some conceptual ideas, what are the specific projects. Some are more developed. We know, and it's already being advanced, the concept of moving the sewer line from Trunk River. So and we have to understand in setting priorities, I think, the difference between sea level rise and major storms. Sea level rise is going to occur gradually over the next 50 years, and we're going to have to be doing more and more. But we also can't wait till we're up to our knees in water before we act. We've got to have done the action before sea level is rising. But we're also facing an unknown significant impact from a major storm. Knock on wood, we haven't had one. But sometime we're going to get one. At any time we could get one. So some of the projects, the two are related, and projects that protect for one may protect for the other, but they're not identical. One concept in the report that could be pursued now would be exploring protecting. It started out as a berm to protect Town Hall from sea level rise, but it should be looked at more broadly as a berm that not only protects Town Hall from sea level rise and nuisance flooding, because it'll start occurring, but to protect Main Street from a Category 3 hurricane. We don't need that at all. So that means exploring how we might protect Town Hall and Main Street is a process that should begin now. But there needs to be more planning done. And redevelopment planning of the area where the berm might go could be an important thing also. And I will be speaking at the 25th Planning Board meeting about the recommendations that are more within their purview, particularly some of the regulatory zoning changes and the planning studies that need to be done. The other one that you talked about is raising roads. There was significant data in our study. Every segment of road, the flood risk was analyzed. A good thing would be DPW could begin to set priorities. When are we going to repair that road? Is that a road that if you raised it 2 feet, I'm just making this up, if you raised it 2 feet, you would protect a significant area from flooding? There are clear examples of that, as I read them without looking at it systematically, and as I drive around town, you can see, if we just raise this a little bit, that wouldn't be prone to flooding on the other side. So we need to begin to look at that systematically and set priorities and begin to identify cost so you can fit that into your future update. Some road raising may be small, can be done easily. Others may be major, as you said, Woods Hole. I know one very vulnerable area is the Scranton Ave at the end. May need to be done sooner. But I think the key thing at this stage is adding expertise, which takes time, onto town staff. How it will be structured and how the town will organize has to be determined. We can't continue. I know you're considering a sustainability position and looking at using some consulting money to do that. I would recommend that probably be done more broadly to look at how you will organize town staff across departments to be able to address and to provide you the type of data and information that you need to make those critical priority decisions. And also to give you the type of analysis you need, better staff to give you the type of analysis to support your decision-making. So that's what I think are the priorities for now. It's mainly beginning to expand town expertise, staff expertise. And that takes time. Maybe you can hire some consultants to help you because, as others have said, there's a lot of money out there specifically devoted to that. It won't be there always. It may be as it gets worse. But we're nearly in a great position to take advantage of that from the data that we have. We need to take it a little bit more steps so we can actually submit grant applications to get to shovel-ready projects.
That's true. We need to do some more designing and have shovel-ready projects.
But we've got the basic, we know what we're facing.
Right.
We have an enormous amount of data. I mean, I
Yeah.
think what's come out of, I just want to say what's come out of this process that your committee undertook is far greater than I think we ever thought, because of that collaboration with the resources that you guys leverage to really, truly create. I mean, there are just thousands of data points for somebody to use and create some action items for.
There is one area where we need more research particularly is how the shoreline itself will evolve as sea level rises and as we experience storms and frequent flooding. We need to understand that more better. That's the role of sediment, how it will move, how it will change. Can surf drive maintain itself as a barrier, or are we inevitably going to face an open bay? The work that the Woods Hole Group was very good at what's the implication of the water moving across, but how does the water change and allow the shoreline, what the scientists call the geomorphology of our shoreline, because that's going to be important, because our objective is not just to protect as much development as possible, recognizing that we will lose some, but how do we have a shoreline that is valuable, that is characterized by wide beaches, dunes, wetlands? That won't happen automatically as these changes occur. But that's what we want, and that's what will be critical to our future economy as it is today. Perhaps we could even end up with a more accessible, more productive natural and recreational shore than we have now. So there may be an opportunity as well as risks.
I think the board is also going to have to decide, where we draw the line. I mean, in some areas, elevating roadways and protecting infrastructure may be beneficial. Maybe will gain us another 30 or 50 years.
Yeah.
In other areas, we're going to just have to realize that we have to let nature take its course. So I think we need to delineate that.
Yes, and one of the things we recommended, we did the surf drive study. We divided the town into 13 or 14 segments that are reflective of the natural environment, but also of the communities. And in the community that I live in, and I've lived there for 80, been at least summers there for 80 years, is one of the most vulnerable because it's low-lying and it's not easily defensible. But as I walk around the community, I have a map where they said, here's what would be flooded by 2070, and it's 100 and some homes. It's pretty much coterminous with what we sued. But I walk around and I see places where you raise this road a little bit and you protect several homes.
Right.
There are some that it's not feasible, but we need to do the detailed studies as we did with Surf Drive, and that has to be followed up on as well, for each of these neighborhoods to refine what can be protected and what has to be let go.
The one thing,
And how, in letting go of some of this, we can create opportunities for those people to remain as part of that community.
I think one thing that we need is a second vulnerability assessment that considers residential properties rather than town infrastructure. Because when we're looking at protecting town hall, we're kind of singling out town hall because it's a town asset. Whereas when I look at the map on page 15, I see this inundation line, which to me is a line of defense. And it's a place where we can delineate. We're gonna have to cross borders if we want to do any elevating. Say, I'd like to see a cost-benefit analysis of the whole section from Main Street out to the beach. What's the property value? What's the tax revenue that's generated there? And how much are we gonna lose if we don't take some action?
And, well, that's why I said, though, the initial recommendation was about a berm to protect town hall from flooding. I see this as much more of a redevelopment just south of Main Street, building in a berm, integrated into redevelopment that protects all of Main Street.
I'm thinking not just Main Street, I'm thinking this whole, that's the most valuable property in town. It's,
Yeah,
you know.
and what will happen, some scheme is a berm of some type of protection for Main Street and parts south of it won't protect all of the development between there and the shoreline.
Right.
What ultimately, it would be development close to the shore may not be able to be protected. Development between that, where we would end up with a wetland, wide beach, dunes, a nice natural shoreline, and then a berm and strong protection for Main Street and the dense commercial and residential development. And then in between where there are homes, those could be flood-proofed. So you do that type of protection. But that's what has to be refined and evolved. And though we have to start now, this will occur over 50 years. This is the time frame we will be thinking of.
Did you have something, Sam?
Yeah, I don't want to, I think Charlie's actually touching on this. I don't want to just simply ignore engineered resiliency. I mean, you look at the Netherlands, and you see how much land they created by their dikes. I mean, I think we should be looking long-term. I won't be around to benefit from it, but I still feel a responsibility to future generations of Falmouth. And so I want us to make sure we have a longer perspective, and also, you know, think in terms of engineering some of the resiliency, not just abandoning. And that should be part of the trade-off.
But you will know that in the Netherlands, their basic approach today is about how to accommodate the water. So they're doing more, they're protecting areas by letting water move to other areas, even if that does involve acquiring some development.
But if they hadn't started 800 years ago building these dikes and...
Well, they wouldn't exist.
Exactly, the whole place would be gone.
Right.
So,
So it's an important decision-making that ultimately you're responsible for, of where do we fortify, where do we strategically retreat?
So I know we need to adopt this and get moving. I see you've got some action items here on pages, 19, 20, 21, that are all very clear and instructive. So I think we need to adopt this policy, but I'm a little hesitant because there's some parts of it that I feel like if we adopt it, we're precluding ourselves from Sam's point of sometimes we're gonna need to elevate roadways and have structure. And all I see in here is identify roads that are gonna be abandoned. And I'm not seeing any that are being identified.
Oh, no, I think we looked at every segment of road
Yeah.
that are subject to flooding. Most of those, I think, will be elevated or protected in some way. Imagine a situation where roads that are close, we get more and more frequent flooding. Nor'easter comes in the winter regularly, and the water doesn't retreat. It freezes. How are we going to deal with roads that are under 2 feet of ice for months at a time? We're not. Those are a limited area, but it is still a substantial area.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess I didn't see this as a policy we were adopting.
Yeah.
I saw this as the data that we use, and then we are gonna create a policy from it. So one of the things that I do think that the way that Charlie is outlining the idea of maybe initially it's a consultancy component, because that's the easiest to do in a timely fashion. And then maybe we do talk about, do we have to create this position of a sustainability director or some other name of somebody who's overarching, really director of getting all those other departments together to talk about some of these projects and create some priorities for the board to look at.
I think I would disagree with you somewhat. I wouldn't focus on a sustainability or resiliency person per se. I know in the past you've talked about a community development. I would talk about integrating the departments that deal with the economic and natural resources of the town, that all the physical existence of the town, have that work more integrated, and numerous staff that have expertise in these areas. It's building the organizational structure and including the expertise that you need. You may want to, I know you talked about using some of the resiliency money that's left for that consultant. Maybe broaden the scope of what that consultant does to look at organization of the town's physical development and future. I mean, this is not inconsistent with the talk about a community development director. I think it heightens significantly the need for that type of organization.
No, I agree with you. I think ultimately there will need to be someone, and I don't think it can be the town manager, assistant town manager, because I think someone to help coordinate what you're talking about. It isn't one person who does all of it. It's clearly that interdepartmental, but somebody, maybe a community development, because you're talking about redevelopment issues. You're talking about, I mean, these are not locked into one sphere, right? So I just think I want this board to kind of ruminate on the fact that some position, we could call it community development because we've been in need of that for a really long time. Some position, I think, needs to be sort of more focused on this issue because it is multifaceted, right? And to pull everyone together so these things don't get lost.
To be resilient, I use the expression selective fortification, strategic retreat. But in some ways, over the long term, it's really redeveloping the town in ways that are inherently resilient and sustainable.
Right.
And I think, personally, I feel like I said, the vulnerability assessment was good, but we need a real delineation of what is likely to be salvageable and what is likely that it's going to be, like, unfortunately, I looked down Mill Road and everything to the right, that whole area is just a big, huge wetland to me, and that's just something that you're never going to be able to, you got Salt Pond, Oyster Pond, and is it Mill Pond? What's the third pond? I don't know.
And
that's a huge wetland. We're never going to be able to elevate or protect that. So if there was any elevation, it would be maybe down Mill Road and Surf Drive, and then you get to the corner by Surf Drive, and you've got that big private property. So it's sort of high ground, but if we're going to do any elevating, then we're going to have to negotiate with those residents. So we need to start with getting some legislation or something that allows towns to spend money on private property. And I know you can have private agreements with the owners, but we need to have something that's really breaches that whole coastline if we're really going to protect downtown.
Well, I think you could approach that with your plan where it's feasible to elevate the roadway. Then the adjoining development might be low, but that would create an incentive for private investment in elevating their property, and we allow them to do that because that does interfere with floodplain regulations. And given the value of most of those properties that might be affected but could be elevated, they may have the resources.
And it could be addressed as a betterment as well.
Yeah, but where we have low-lying filled wetlands, like Silver Beach or down by, across from the bathhouse, you know. Oh, that reminds me, another quick project could be, which we recommended, is replacing the bathhouses with portable structures. Because we could get a hurricane at any time. And I don't mean just something that you buy off from some, anyway, whatever
Not a
those
trailer.
things are.
Container.
A trailer, a
A shipping
container.
container.
No, maybe, I worked with one community, we were very successful in doing a design competition. Have a design competition, how to develop a design an attractive beach bathhouse that's portable.
I think we should just have an inflatable ring around it and an anchor.
Well, you know, let me digress 1 minute. I watched a program, it was on one of these British health programs. Somebody was in a flood-prone area right on the river. And what they did was they put the foundation in, but then within the foundation, there were, as water flooded the foundation, it raised the house during any flooding and then dropped it back down. Now, that's totally impractical.
Right.
But, you know, there may be somebody who could afford to do that.
I know that the school department actually put in bathhouses that were basically moved to the site as a unit and dropped into place and hooked up to utilities, all planned, of course, ahead of time on a pad. But there's no reason why we couldn't consider something like that, where it could be potentially moved out in case of a storm impact.
Yeah, and taken out in the winter, you know, when we have frequent storms. But that could be done now, because our risk there is not just from future sea level rise, but from nor'easters and from that hurricane that we're going to get at some point, anytime.
So part of what I think we have to do is change the way we think, and through all of the town departments, and look at things through the lens of sustainability, resiliency, and smart growth. And it is a different way of thinking. And I do believe, I agree with Megan, that we are at some point going to need that position who has the expertise to work with other departments to start thinking about their projects through that lens.
Yeah. And I might say on the charter review, that was one of the ideas that behind develop procedures to assess the consistency of agency actions with policy.
But it goes back to this position that we've talked about for a long time, right, of a community development coordinator, because they can do a lot of that, right? That's the, so I think that that's a conversation that we need to have again about, you know, what does that look like? How does that connect with the things we're talking about here? And sort of turn this into something that is a set of actions that work their way through with priorities.
Okay, so here's one criticism I have to give, is that the one thing that we asked not to have was another study, you know, because we had the one from 2003 and then, you know, another one subsequently later. This one is got a lot more action items in it, but really what I wanted, and I hoped we would have, is just a list of what to do, and just, we keep checking off the boxes, you know, where to start. And I'm not really clear on what the priority is and where to really begin, other than, like what I'm saying is a townwide assessment that looks at the property values. I mean, what do you think is the priority what's our first action item?
Move the sewer from Trunk River, and you're doing that.
We're already doing that, right?
Consider a physical protection for somewhere south of Main Street. And that requires a lot, but it can be done with, the planning board can do a study of that area, because that's kind of, that analogous to what they've done on Davis Straits. That could be redeveloped as a parallel Main Street, and then a berm that's recreational. You know, there's a lot of opportunity there. I think we have to look at it. Doug, it's such a complex issue and it's so evolving. There aren't simple physical projects. Say, do that and you'll solve something.
But we got to start somewhere.
We've got to start somewhere. The work in Woods Hole is important.
Mhm.
You know,
To me, I'm saying, I hate to just keep doing, consultants and stuff, but I think we need another vulnerability assessment and cost-benefit analysis from Surf Drive to Main Street, and a look at whether or not the berm that goes behind Town Hall can extend all the way around the pond, and if there's a line of defense opportunity that we should be looking at. I mean, I think that's the next thing that we need to do, is decide what are our limits of what we're willing to do to preserve things, or do we want to just turn and walk away and say, sorry?
Inevitably, it's going to be a combination. We're going to be able to protect some things and others we're not.
Yep.
And the general outline of that, I think we can consider. I could go down the whole coastline of the town and say, yeah, this can be already protected, this can. But we need to do it start doing it systematically now to get to that. The general approach, we don't need that. We don't need to know more about, except in the area of the role of sediment, because that can be significant in determining whether we can protect or how we protect or what is the result. We begin to do these very focused studies, but action plans reach by reach of the shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we start with Surf Drive to Main Street. And that's going to include, because we've got a lot done. It was outlined.
Right.
And we did in the report, they came down with 4 scenarios.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And we said in our report to you, we would eliminate 2 of those scenarios. We're not going to build a causeway. We're not going to build a 19-foot wall on Surf Drive. We're not those. And then there were 2 that were, one was more create a large park, an abandoned part of the property. The other was abandon some and build some berms along roadways, etc. So we've narrowed it. That's what now we need. You need to begin to be able to make those decisions as a priority. What are we going to do there? Because some of the sea level rise there is happening, not just water coming, the groundwater is rising.
Yep.
That's how it's going to come up. The sea level will start pushing groundwater up further, and it's already near the shore, near the surface.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Charlie has articulated exactly what my suggestion would be. There are lots of tax dollars. I'm going to set aside, I understand the importance of residential, but, somebody's house, I'm never going to say I understand it's part of the tax base, so we get more money from that particular property than this particular property. But in terms of the impact of those individuals, I'm going to set aside that because I think that becomes complicated. If we're just looking at public tax dollars, there's an enormous amount of tax dollars invested in the space that we're talking about. Surf Drive here to Main Street, and then the sewering, near the bike path. Those are municipal assets that we have all invested in really big ways, and if they were damaged, would require, they would have to be fixed. First of all, we could not abandon, and we could not be without our fire station, our headquarters, for a long period of time, or all those other, police station, all these other assets that are nearby. And I think we have already recognized that Surf Drive is one of our most vulnerable points consistently. Any nor'easter, any even just significant tidal situation, and DPW is trying to work on that road. So I think if we focus in, I know we have other pieces we have to do more long-term, but if we focus in our next area of sort of action and creating more specificity for possible options to that particular piece and to exactly what we just talked about. So it's 2 pieces. Sort of, what do we do about Surf Drive? What are options at Surf Drive? And what are prices, potential connected to that, et cetera? And then what are options and everything connected to the idea of I'll just say the idea of a berm, but some protective or responsive actions for town hall this way. And I think those are two enormous projects, enormous undertaking, very big price tags, I'm guessing. But those would address very specific and already identified vulnerabilities that we have to, town assets, businesses, yes, residences as well. But again, like I said, I think, you could easily point to where Charlie is in North Falmouth and say there are hundreds of homes there. Why aren't we protecting? I think we've got to get away from, I think we have to start somewhere.
Yep.
And if we know we start strategically where damage would really undercut the ability of the town to even provide services, some basic services, that's why I think we should start with that section.
And we also have to look at the practical application of it. So if elevating Surf Drive roadway only gives us a benefit for 10 or 15 years,
And it's $1 bazillion.
maybe it's not a good idea, because like he said, the elevated water is gonna be coming up in those areas by Walker Street. We've got those low areas that just they flood all the time now, just from regular rainwater. We can't elevate the whole town, so we're gonna have to use a topographic map, see
Look,
where.
we're not gonna solve this problem by thinking about these scenarios. I'm gonna ask our town managers, how do we get to a position where we can make some informed decisions about how to invest taxpayers' money to basically provide the kind of coastal resiliency which is gonna assure long-term economic viability for both, the businesses and for the residents. And so how can we get there? Because I think that's what we need. I like your priorities. I think that's reasonable. We can carve those out. But the next step is, how do we get to a point where
I
we
agree.
can
I think
start investing in how do we get a plan and some sense of how to actually implement that plan?
That's true. There's a lot of truth to that, but there's also political ideas about whether or not, say for instance, one of the recommendations is to begin to acquire property in these zones.
It's a given. But we need somebody to identify all those.
Are we gonna pay market value for real estate? We don't have that much money.
But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, because I think what we need is to give a directive about something very specific. To sort of Sam's point, to staff to say, come back to us with whatever, options available for this, implications of this, okay? I mean, some of it will be to identify properties that maybe are most at risk and can we acquire them, or even, that's a little bit too specific, maybe from Frank, a sense of how that would play out if we determine that we're going to no longer use particular roadways. What are some, general implications of that? What does that mean? I think those are the things that we, very specific to an area, not generally, very specific to an area and a specific project that will give us something to work with.
And if we need staff to get there,
that we are.
We need to know from you, who it would be, what their salary implications will be, and how is it going to get addressed by our budget, by our revenue.
So there's a mission. Let's see, what would be the practical line of defense in this Surf Drive area? Would it be the beach? Would it be some property line halfway in between where the topography makes it more practical? How would we go about it? Would we offer to take those properties by eminent domain to create this berm? Those are the obstacles that we're gonna have to
We use
be up against.
consultancy funds, so if we are asking, the way I see this playing out, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I see us very area specific, what we just talked about, and we may need funds for a consultant, because we do not probably have and I'm not knocking town staff, but this is really, when we're talking about, all the available options for resiliency and mitigation, some of these are way beyond what we have these are specialized areas of study and engineering. I think we need a consultant working with town staff who will provide that information to give us those, to do that. That's what I would like to see happen.
Yeah.
So we have a consultant come back with a level of expertise, having had all the information from the town departments that are involved, to say, these are 3 options, these are price tags, these are pros, these are cons. And then we can go from there. I just want to keep it really tight and specific.
With a consultant.
I agree.
And the consultant would probably be either Woods Hole Group or some type of group
We'd have
like
to put out
that.
an RFP.
We don't know who it.
I think you have to be careful that you don't limit it to this locale. There are other places, you know, in this country that have been addressing these issues. I know the New Jersey coast under a tremendous impact from storms 10 years ago. I've forgotten, the Irene, I think, was the
Sandy.
storm. And
And
Sandy.
Irene, mhm.
And so there are consultants that have been dealing with other areas that have faced similar kinds of coastal resiliency issues. I don't want us to limit it just to, you know, New England. If we can find a consultant that has far more experience and perspective on how towns can address these.
I'm saying
kinds of
that's the type of consultant
things.
that it would be.
Agreed. You just said Woods Hole Group, and
Just saying,
I
as
have
an
great
example.
respect for them. But I think we need to worry about the best expertise, if you will, experience and what have you, that can be brought in.
And they don't just work in Woods Hole, they work around the whole country
Okay,
too.
that's fine.
But
I don't wanna
it'll probably
rule
be an
them out.
RFP, so, I mean, it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, that's the example of the type of consultant it would be.
I'm not trying to rule them out. I know quite a few of the members that I have great respect for them.
I really appreciate the fact, which was not done in previous reports, was all the regulatory work that you guys did about the zoning, the transfer of development rights, all the practical things that are needed to be considered. That's groundbreaking, because it hasn't been done before.
And I'm going to, in my presentation on the 25th to the Planning Board, I'm going to go into more detail on the regulatory approaches. One of the concepts that I'd suggest is amortization of development. In other words, if development is really just threatened by future sea level rise, and that's not going to occur for 50 years, though it'll get messy before then, we don't want to say, oh, we expect this to be flooded in 50 years, you can't build there. You can build there.
But you know the risk.
You not only know the risk, you've given a permit that's good for 30 years or some performance standard, and you've posted a bond for removal of the development. Okay, then you can go ahead. Because we're going to have to be development that is affected by sea level rise in the future. We're going to have that removed well before it's completely inundated. Otherwise, it'll be a polluting mess.
Yeah.
We won't be able to get more beach. We won't be able to get more recreational boating. We won't be able to take advantage of the change that occurred if there's half fallen down houses for a mile along the shore.
Another thing that
And we're not going to want to be trying to protect the infrastructure that's serving them. That's a legal issue that's important because generally the town has an obligation to maintain the infrastructure. But when those rules were developed legally, no one was thinking of sea level rise, that it would be impossible to maintain it at some point. So
another thing that we're going to need to think about is your point about the groins. That's sort of something that should be done soon. You remove the toe of the groin. You don't have to take the whole structure out, but just let the sand pass by. That's another project that we need to take up.
Well, that's where, and this is important, as we looked at, say, you mentioned the Coastal Resources Working Group from 2003, 2010. That's a solid report, still worth consulting, particularly on that sediment issue, which we need more information. If a groin is performing a positive obstruction at that location, but it's inhibiting the movement of sand, sediment from that area that would protect a larger area, that's what we need to know. And then we say, well, you know, you can't repair that after a storm. And that's where your zoning authority, which is much broader under where you're looking at the docks, you can look at everything. And it extends inland if it's an area of critical environmental concern. Maybe we could designate areas projected to be inundated as critical environmental areas. Well, they certainly are.
They are.
That would give you broad regulatory authority over any development and be able to condition it, since it's a special permit, in innovative ways and avoid challenges. So there's a lot to be explored on the legal side as well. That's why I said when I made the presentation, I'm going on too long. To address resiliency, we need to deal with administration, regulation, education, research, redevelopment planning, and actual projects. they're all involved. And the mix is just different depending on the geography.
Right.
Really helpful to have it summarized like that.
Thoughts from staff on all this?
I thought that was a good summation.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Not to take under advisement.
Do we need to vote to accept this report?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
I don't know. I don't think I think we can, just because it took so long to do. We probably should honor it with a vote to
I think
accept it.
so, yes.
Wait, let me just ask a quick question. We accept the work that the committee has done, we accept the report, but it is not accepted as policy.
It's not a policy because it
Right.
wasn't.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
Exactly.
Okay.
Policy will get days from that.
Yeah,
This-
Right, but this is not a
Will get
policy.
reflected in the
Right.
comprehensive plan.
No, I get that part.
Recommendations on policy, how you adopt it.
Yep, but it's not, it in itself does
itself is
not
not
stand. I wanted to just clarify that.
So I'd
yeah.
move to accept, but just right before Mark comes up, I'd move to accept
Report?
the report as submitted.
Second.
Do you want to talk before we vote?
No, I just wanted to ask a question, whatever, make a suggestion. This issue is kind of conflates two issues, which is natural erosion as well as sea level rise. Next time we have a consultant's report on this subject, I was wondering, because it's my understanding there's been satellite telemetry that allows us to actually measure the rate of sea level rise. So do you think that that could actually be quantified in any future reports we have? Because everything we ever hear is just conjecture. And as I said, the technology exists to actually tell us what the rate has been, and I'd kind of like to hear it.
Sure. I'm sure that can be included. Yes, Dan?
I have 2 minutes.
Sure.
This is all very interesting, and I agree with what's been happening here and talking about here. But I'm on the Beach Committee, Waterways Committee, and a few more. And I'm looking now at a town that has in the past 6 and 7 years not taken care of things. And we have beaches that are in really bad shape. We have beach houses that are really falling down. And we haven't spent any money on the harbors. They have gotten in bad shape. And we're going to lose what we have now if we don't start taking care of our stuff instead of just patching. And we've got to work on it. I mean, the Waterways Committee is talking about a couple of $100 million. The Beach Committee can use a few million. And we keep doing things and building things. We are a tourist town. And even our people who live here year-round or live here in the summer and go to Florida in the winter aren't tourists, but they're here because of the harbors and the beaches. And they're the ones that are going to pay what the taxes to pay for all of this. And if that keeps going downhill, I think we're going to be in a lot of trouble. We don't have any industry here. We don't have anything else to keep this town going. And we have a beautiful town. It's a wonderful place. It's got a lot of land. It's got a lot of opportunities. I mean, nobody else has 13 harbors in it. We don't have the amount of beaches we have, but we're losing them, and they're messy looking, and it's not bringing people here.
We're going to be
Isn't
talking.
Falmouth nice? I want that to come back. That's about 20 years ago. And we don't have that now. It's, yeah, this is good, but not other things. And I think we've got to look at today and what we haven't been doing and try and correct it.
as soon as we can. I won't be around here to see it. I'm 84. But I do have a family that lives here, has a company here. I have grandchildren that I hope are going to live here. And I want to go away when things are improving. And yes, we have to look out for storms. There's nothing we can do about storms, and we will have them. And the storm coming tomorrow or Saturday could wipe us out. But that's
Okay.
another thing. And thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Dan.
you, Dan. And a note, also, there was a reminder in here about a study of Chapel Beach that was done in 2016, which gave a lot of information, and we just talked at our last meeting about looking at the options for Chapel, so there's that to fall back to that's got a lot of information that's already compiled.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Dryer and Mr. Finneran both had their hands up.
Okay, Mr. Dyer first, then Mr. Finneran again. And before you go, unless it's going to affect our vote, we're going to accept this report, right? All those in favor of accepting the report?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Dryer.
Paul Dreyer, I'm the planning board representative to the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee. I want to endorse what Charlie has said. We spent a lot of time on that. I attended every one of those meetings. I think he did a good summary, but I'd like to emphasize 2 points. I think the position of someone as a coastal resource specialist on staff is very, very important to move this forward. Secondly, as mentioned, there were 13 segments done around town. We only evaluated one segment along Surf Drive Beach. The others have to be done as well, because there are issues, obviously, in Woods Hole, Minot, and North Falmouth.
Right.
So this is a long-term process, and I would encourage you to follow the recommendations of Mr. McCaffrey.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Paul.
work.
Yes, Mr. Finneran.
Just to add to what Dan said about our maintenance of the beaches, and this is kind of old information. It comes from when I was participating in the wastewater committee hearings, and I read the SMAS report 4 times and all kinds of other relative documents. But at that point in time, well, this part remains true, is we have the largest coastline of the 15 towns on Cape Cod, but we were 13th in the use of the Barnstable County dredge. So that in and of itself says that we are not maintaining our beaches, especially the ones that are more susceptible. And there are ones that are more susceptible. For instance, I live in Falmouth Heights, and in like 1957, they took 38,000 yards out of Falmouth Harbor and deposited on the Heights Beach. And the vast majority of it is still there. It's actually one of the most, if not the most stable beach on the South Coast. And if you just to educate yourselves, if you ever want to know why, go to Minot Beach and look out towards Nobska Light, and you can picture how the ocean flows and why that is somewhat protected by Nobska and, the end of Davisville or whatever. But point being, we don't maintain our beaches enough. You can go to Old Silver Beach. It used to stretch way out. It was probably 4 times the size that it is now. I remember my son dug a hole down there. He's 41 now, when he was about 6, over his head, way up, and it's not even there. And if you just go to Old Silver Beach and look out, you can see where all the sand is. It's washing away, and it should be, captured and brought back and put where it was, and we're not doing enough of that.
I agree. All the jetties have been dragging a bunch of sand out. We don't have to go way out in the ocean to mine. We just take back what we just lost. So it's a lot of regulations. Yes, sir. A lot of regulations that we're going to need to work on with our legislatures to get permission to do these things.
Hi, everyone. Dave Moriarty, President of Falmouth. I just have a couple questions about, I really appreciate what you folks are doing is to protect the town. I think that's excellent. And I support it 100%. And I want to, hopefully we will do the same for the residents if at all this project ever goes forward, the Mayflower Wind Project. we will take as much care as protecting the residents, their home values, the Falmouth tax base, and most importantly, the health and safety of the children, grandchildren of the folks of these neighborhoods. And, you know, I guess it's a good thing that our governor, Charlie Baker, has removed the cap on wind energy. So there's no limit. So there's no reason in the world that Mayflower Wind
We don't
can't.
have them on.
It's not an agenda.
We don't have them on our agenda today, so it's not fair to be talking about them.
Well,
and
it's
they don't-
infrastructure. It's a major infrastructure project.
It's not our infrastructure, it's theirs.
It's our town.
It's a project that's gonna be.
It's our town. It's yours.
It's
It's
a
all of
project that's
ours.
gonna be before us, and we are gonna address the public health and safety, and we have had open meetings, and we're gonna continue to have them.
Well, you know what? I'm still waiting for the time to address Mayflower Wind. They told me there would be many opportunities
Well, we've
to
had a
address
few-
them.
We've had a few already, and we're gonna be having several more.
Well, Mayflower Wind needs to have a presentation for the town and the residents of the town.
We will have that.
Yeah.
No, Mayflower Wind needs
I'm
to
sure
come
they're
here.
going to.
I'm saying the board will bring Mayflower Wind.
When?
To a public
When? We've
meeting.
been asking for 2
conversation.
years. 2 years I've been asking Mayflower Wind, are they gonna put the cable in stainless steel conduits and gas-infused pipes
We can't
to
take this up
contain
any-
the EMFs?
We can't just keep on going.
All right, well, I would just request that Mayflower Wind get their ass down to Falmouth and tell the residents of Falmouth what they plan to do.
We will be doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so one other thing about the coastal resiliency report. I noticed there was one big item that was just not considered because it was considered to be too costly, which was consideration of potential offshore reef. I just want to throw this out there that we have 2 concrete plants in Falmouth, which is a little bit unusual. Most towns don't even have one. Whenever the concrete trucks go out, they almost always have a little bit of leftover concrete. And Mr. Pacillo has a plan that he builds footings for decks, and he stocks them in his yard, and he has them on hand whenever you want to do a precast footing, he's got it ready to go. There's no reason why we couldn't, in the future, consider an offshore reef that doesn't have to be all built at one time for millions and millions of dollars, but maybe it's a program that we might develop where Mr. Pacillo or Mr. I forget his name, at Falmouth Ready Mix could have standing capacity to make these star-shaped boulder things that they make out of concrete using their leftovers. They could stockpile them throughout the year. At the end of the year, we could have a program with a barge, go out and deposit them. Maybe we only get, a couple hundred yards a year, or who knows what we would get. But not thinking of it as a giant project. Of course, for permitting it would need to be, but a piecemeal approach on that, we could extend that reef over the course of, several years and provide some breakwater out there. So just there's so many different ideas, and this is such a complex issue that we're gonna have to really be creative to keep it reasonable. One last thought?
Just to expand on what you said, I figured it out once sitting at Minot Beach. How the actions are different on all beaches. And your suggestion is actually a very good one, because you could take the central location where all the actions basically pivot from, and you could start doing what you propose there, and it would almost be immediate. I project that it would almost be immediately measurable, the benefit, because it would stop the full cycle. If you placed it in the middle, and it wouldn't be that difficult to figure out where that is, and the plan would be to, work left and right, north and south, east and west, or whatever at that point, and that's actually a very good idea.
Thanks.
Well, with that, Could I, on that positive note?
That's a great note to end on.
I know.
All right, so any other comments or thoughts from anybody? Thank you all for coming in on a Saturday. Really appreciate it.
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And thank you all for coming in as well.
Thank you.